Chapter 642. Seeing the two people who had just entered slowly walk over with steady footsteps, the great hall of Kunlun was silent for a moment. Lu Chen looked at old Ma, while True Lord Tianlan turned his head to look at Lu Chen. Lu Chen could feel True Lord Tianlan's gaze on him. He didn't even need to look at the damn Baldy's eyes to feel the astonishment, surprise, and even a bit of mockery in his eyes. He knew what this damn Baldy was thinking. He knew that right now, True Lord Tianlan wanted to preserve some dignity for himself, as well as maintain some dignity in front of Shuang and the others. That was why he wasn't laughing to his heart's content. Although it was soundless, he seemed to be able to hear that laughter. The most inexplicable thing was that Lu Chen actually guessed that this damn Baldy probably knew that Lu Chen could understand his thoughts, so he was pretending to laugh in his heart. This was an inexplicable intuition that didn't make any sense. However, when Lu Chen silently turned his head to look at True Lord Tianlan, and saw this damn Baldy's unprecedentedly serious expression as well as the light that constantly flickered in his eyes, Lu Chen knew that his guess was probably correct. This feeling of telepathy was really embarrassing to the point of wanting to die. Shuang brought old Ma to the front. True Lord Tianlan's sleeves moved slightly as he looked at the two of them. Shuang stepped forward to greet them, and old Ma knelt down as well. True Lord Tianlan's expression didn't change, as if he had suddenly forgotten that he had called Shuang over for an urgent matter. He only nodded lightly and said, "You've come." Shuang solemnly bowed to True Lord Tianlan, then stood up and said with a respectful expression, "My lord, I have a guess as to why you summoned me here in the middle of the night. However, before you speak, I also have an urgent matter to report." True Lord Tianlan nodded and said, "No problem, you go first." Shuang stepped to the side, revealing old Ma's figure. She then said, "Fuyunji's former Shadow Patrol Inspector Ma Xiaoyun has something to report to you." Both True Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen could tell that Shuang had deliberately emphasized the first 5 words in her simple words. She was probably emphasizing her identity. Supreme Lord Tianlan couldn't help glancing at Lu Chen out of the corner of his eye. Lu Chen stood aside expressionlessly, looking as unresponsive as a wooden man. Perfected Lord Tianlan's eyes flickered with a faint smile. "Go ahead." Without saying a word, old Ma took 2 steps forward on his knees. Suddenly, he reached into his bosom and took out a box. He presented it to Supreme Lord Tianlan with both hands and said loudly, "My lord, by chance, I have recently obtained one of the 4 fragments of the Devil Sect's legendary Tree of God, the Tree of God's branch. I dare not covet such a precious treasure, so I have specially come to offer it to you." His words were resolute and full of vigor, showing his loyalty. Supreme Lord Tianlan seemed to be moved. He nodded and said, "There's such a thing?" Old Ma said, "Yes, the treasure is in this box. Please have a look, my lord." Supreme Lord Tianlan casually waved his hand and the box in old Ma's hand flew into his. After weighing it in his hand, Supreme Lord Tianlan opened the lid. At that moment, a green light shone out from the box. It flowed and swayed, carrying a strange aura of life. It was a spiritual power that almost no living creature in the world could possess. Legend had it that only the 4 fragments of the Devil Sect possessed it. It was the aura of the Tree of God. Lu Chen recognized that it was the real Tree of God's branch, and so did Supreme Lord Tianlan. At that moment, even with his calmness, he couldn't help but smile happily. He nodded and said, "Good, good, good. Little Ma, you have made a great contribution." Old Ma kowtowed and then stood up silently. He walked to Shuang and stood behind her. He lowered his head and lowered his arms, staring at the ground. Lu Chen looked at his old friend with a complicated expression. After a while, he sighed softly. Seeing Supreme Lord Tianlan smiling and playing with the Tree of God necklace in his hand, Shuang also walked forward and said with a smile, "My lord, are you satisfied with this treasure?" Supreme Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "Very good." Shuang smiled and pointed at old Ma. She said, "Please tell me, how should I reward this person?" Supreme Lord Tianlan chuckled. His eyes flickered as he glanced at Lu Chen. His expression didn't change as he said generously, "This item is of great use to me. Little Ma, you have done well and made a great contribution. How about this, from today onwards, Ma Xiaoyun will be promoted to Deputy Hall Master of Fiyunji. He will assist Shuang in managing the affairs of the shadow. This can be considered his old profession." Shuang was slightly startled. She then smiled and nodded in agreement. Old Ma had already knelt down to express his thanks. After a short delay and a few more words, Shuang and Old Ma stood up and left. Supreme Lord Tianlan didn't ask them to stay. However, before Shuang left, she turned around and asked Supreme Lord Tianlan, "My lord, you said that you called me over for an urgent matter. I wonder if I still have." She didn't finish her sentence, but there was a questioning look in her eyes and expression. Supreme Lord Tianlan laughed and waved his hand. He said, "What urgent matter?" It's fine. You can go." Shuang smiled like a flower. She nodded in agreement. Then, she left the hall with Old Ma. Before she left, she seemed to deliberately look at Lu Chen. There was a meaningful look in her eyes. Lu Chen was speechless. He only clenched his fists that were hidden in his sleeves. After Shuang and Old Ma left, only Supreme Lord Tianlan and Lu Chen were left in the hall of Kunlun. The atmosphere returned to a somewhat awkward silence. Supreme Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen. He didn't say anything. Instead, he clicked his tongue from time to time. Lu Chen couldn't take it anymore. He glared at him and scolded, "What are you clucking at? Look at your gloating face." Supreme Lord Tianlan laughed and pointed at Lu Chen. "Are you a good-for-nothing? You don't have many capable subordinates. Now, your most trusted one has run away?" Lu Chen was about to retort. Suddenly, he felt a chill in his heart. Although he said it as if he was joking, was there any truth in it? Supreme Lord Tianlan laughed for a while. Then, he said in a softer voice, "I believe you also know that I can't refuse my reward just now." Lu Chen nodded slightly. He didn't have any objection to this. As the leader of a powerful force, he could act arbitrarily and be domineering. However, he couldn't act recklessly when it came to rewards. No matter what he thought in private, Old Ma had given him such an important treasure. It was of great significance to Supreme Lord Tianlan. He might even be able to continue his secret plan without having to deal with another divine transformation stage perfected cultivator. This alone was worth the position of a Deputy Hall Master in Fiyunji. But why? Supreme Lord Tianlan looked at Lu Chen with a faint smile. "Did you fall out with Ma Xiaoyun recently?" "No." Lu Chen sighed and answered gloomily. Then, he asked himself in his heart, "Why is that?" Chapter 643. From Lu Chen's point of view, no matter how he thought about it, he could not figure out why Old Ma would suddenly turn his back on him and stand on Shui Ying's side for no apparent reason. In fact, at this moment, his heart was filled with doubts. There were almost no emotions such as anger or even killing intent for revenge. If he had to list them himself, Lu Chen could tell Old Ma that he was stronger than Shuang and that his future prospects were better. At least 10 or 20 reasons would not be a problem. And Lu Chen himself believed that Old Ma was not a fool. He could see that true Lord Tianlan was cultivating Lu Chen as his successor, intentionally or unintentionally. In such a good situation, Old Ma had actually abandoned him, jumped off his ship, and boarded someone else's ship. There could only be one meaning: that guy did not seem to be optimistic about Lu Chen. Lu Chen knew Old Ma very well and trusted him very much. It could even be said that Old Ma was the person he trusted the most. So when this happened, although he did not show it on the surface, he was still surprised and a little suspicious about his situation. Could it be that he had overlooked something? Could it be that he had made a big mistake without knowing it? He shut himself in the quiet room and thought about it carefully for a while. He went through all the things that had happened during this period of time in his mind. In the end, Lu Chen found that although he had met a lot of people and things these days, and did not do everything perfectly, he basically did not make any mistakes. That would really be a ghost. After Lu Chen confirmed that there should be no major problems on his side, he began to doubt old Ma's intelligence. Was that guy really stupid? For most people on Sky Dragon Mountain, old Ma was not a person worth paying attention to. Even within Fuyunji, in the past, old Ma was remembered as a person who followed behind Lu Chen all day long. He could be considered as one of the few subordinates of this true lord's successor. Lu Chen was in the limelight and his prestige was growing day by day, but old Ma had always been very low-key. Almost no one could feel his existence. Because of this, old Ma's switch did not cause too much of a stir in Zhengxianmeng and even in Fuyunji. Many people did not even know about it. However, within Fuyunji, especially within the small circle of the core, old Ma's decision to jump ship was like a sudden clap of thunder, strongly stimulating a group of people. This meant a lot. First of all, Lu Chen's closest confidant had betrayed him. This must mean that there was something wrong with Lu Chen's current situation. Everyone could think of this. After all, even Lu Chen himself could not help thinking about it after knowing about old Ma's action, to see if he had done anything wrong. In addition, there was another very important piece of news, which was that Lord Tianlan generously rewarded old Ma with a position as the deputy chief of Fuyunji. Although the actual power of old Ma had not been determined, this gesture had already explained a lot. Lord Tianlan actually approved of old Ma's betrayal, even though he had jumped ship with Lord Tianlan's only disciple, Lu Chen. Did this mean that Lord Tianlan's attitude towards his disciple had also changed a little? Because the matter of the Tree of God's branch fragment was very important, it was not actually leaked out. Everyone only saw those superficial things. Whether it was Lord Tianlan, Lu Chen, Shuaying, or even old Ma himself, none of them would come forward to explain anything. Thus, amidst the flabbergasted cries, Lu Chen's originally great situation had inexplicably begun to show signs of being shaken by the wind and rain again. The Immortal City was the largest city in the world. It had a large population and was flourishing. Even at night, the lights at night were abnormally bright and beautiful, so much so that the night view of the Immortal City had also become a popular and famous scenery. The best place in the world to watch the night view of the Immortal City was on Mount Celestial Dragon beside the Immortal City. Every night when the moon was bright and the stars were sparse, standing on the high peak and looking down, one could see the huge city shrouded in the night sky. The lights were bright and dazzling, illuminating the night like the most precious jewels in the world, emitting a dazzling light that was intoxicating. There were not many people who could enjoy such a beautiful and rare scenery. Most of the time, only the people in Zhengxianmeng who occupied Mount Celestial Dragon had the right to do so. At the same time, some of the best scenic spots had long been occupied by the big shots in Zhengxianmeng, so there were not many good spots left to watch. Even if there were, it would be in some dangerous and high places that even cultivators did not like to go to. That night, Lu Chen brought Atu to a mountain peak that was deserted but had a good view. He brought some wine with him, and as he enjoyed the night view of the beautiful night view, he drank the wine. He looked very happy. The wind on the mountain was very strong, but the black dog did not respond to it at all. This dog's physique seemed to be rapidly evolving into the legendary divine beast. Even Lu Chen could feel the fierce undercurrent under the calmness. He thought that it was probably time for Atsu to return to the Great Snow Mountain soon. Vanity Fair. Lu Chen took a big gulp of wine and seemed to feel a little cold. He hugged Atsu and felt the warmth under the thick and soft fur. He rubbed his face comfortably and then murmured, "Atsu, do you know that below us is the world's biggest Vanity Fair?" Atsu looked back at him. Although this dog had become a little abnormal recently, it still did not seem to understand the word Vanity Fair. Lu Chen did not bother to explain to it. He just stared at the lights at the foot of the mountain. After a while, he suddenly said, "In fact, I am almost the same as him. At the beginning, all I wanted was to survive. Later, the situation gradually changed, and I got more things. In the end, even the damn Baldy had to protect me and give me such a big piece of cake." He smiled slightly self-deprecatingly and said, "Atsu, do you like eating cake?" Woof. Atsu stared at Lu Chen and shook its head firmly and solemnly. It seemed a little afraid that its crafty master, Lu Chen, would replace the monster meat with cake in the future. Lu Chen rolled his eyes at it, spread out his hands, and said, "So now that I think about it, I can't blame old Ma, because in fact, even I have changed." He looked at the brightly lit city at the foot of the mountain and said, "Who doesn't want fame and fortune? It's good to have fame and fortune. If you can be a person above others, you can enjoy all the happiness in the world. Isn't this what people want in their life? Who is willing to follow behind others and be a minion for the rest of their life? Seeing that you have a bright future, do you want to be buried for the rest of your life?" "Why should I?" Lu Chen asked in a low voice. No one knew whether he was asking himself or Atsu, but Atsu did not seem to have any intention to answer. It raised its head and looked at the clear night sky. Suddenly, its eyes became serious, and it looked into the distance. Then, it suddenly shouted and roared. Lu Chen was shocked. He raised his head and looked in the direction that Atsu was looking at. In the distant sky, in the darkness of the night, a red light suddenly appeared. Chapter 644. The Blood Sea anomaly that shrouded the sky above the immortal city and the hearts of many people in Zhengxiameng suddenly arrived in a very unusual way. Of course, in fact, the Blood Sea anomaly itself was an unusual thing, otherwise it would not be called an anomaly. However, this time, it was also the last Blood Sea anomaly that people expected. Even compared to the previous Blood Sea anomalies, it seemed very strange. First of all, it came earlier than most people thought. The feeling it gave people was, it hasn't been that long, why is the last Blood Sea anomaly coming already? However, if one carefully recalled the time when the Blood Sea anomaly appeared in the past, one would find that the interval between each Blood Sea anomaly was indeed getting shorter and shorter. It was just that the interval in the past was still long, so it was not particularly obvious. It was not as shocking as the last Blood Sea anomaly. Of course, it was also possible that they knew in advance that this was the last Blood Sea anomaly. Something bad should happen, so the impact on people's hearts was greater. In addition to the time, the scene of the last Blood Sea anomaly was also completely different from the previous times. There was no longer the rolling waves of the Blood Sea that swept across the sky, no longer the dark red blood curtain that instantly covered the entire clear sky, and no longer the insufferably arrogant aura that engulfed the world when the Blood Sea anomaly appeared in the past. From the beginning, the Blood Sea in the sky seemed to have been resisted. Yes, from the very beginning, the Sea of Blood phenomenon didn't progress very smoothly, as if it was being resisted by some mysterious power. As a result, the Sea of Blood in the sky couldn't completely spread out. At the edge of the enormous celestial city, it was extremely difficult for the Sea of Blood to advance, and it even spread out to the sides. That night, Lu Chen and Atu, who had been standing at the peak of Mount Celestial Dragon, had witnessed the entire scene very clearly. They had witnessed the entire process from the appearance of the Blood Sea to its subsequent changes. At the same time, on Mount Celestial Dragon, Lu Chen was not the only one who sensed the appearance of the Blood Sea and observed this scene from various places. In Kunlun Palace Hall, Heavenly Law Hall, Starry Hall, Dazayuan and many other places, there were people quietly looking up at the sky this night, watching the arrival of this last Blood Sea phenomenon. When the mortals woke up in the morning, they would feel that the sky seemed to be slightly darker than usual. When they walked out of the house and looked up at the sky, what appeared in front of them was a strange sky. The sky was still the same sky, at least the sky above their heads was still the same. However, at the edge of the immortal city, a huge circle pattern appeared in the sky, and the surging Blood Sea still appeared in the sky. It drowned every inch of space in the sky visible to the naked eye, except for the top of the immortal city. It was as if this magical and huge city suddenly emitted some kind of powerful force on this day, blocking the evil Blood Sea outside the door. However, the Blood Sea refused to retreat, and still lingered outside the door very fiercely, besieging, crashing, and slowly nibbling away the originally intact sky inch by inch, pushing inwards bit by bit. The originally intact sky was only left in the huge circle above the immortal city, and within the range visible to the naked eye, the dark red color at the edge was still pushing inwards. Things were changing. As the only successor of perfected Lord Tianlan, a core figure in the system of Fuyunji, Lu Chen quickly and nimbly received some news, and felt the undercurrent surging under the calm in Zhengxianmeng. This time, it seemed to be really different from before. Most of the cultivators in Zhengxianmeng were still dismissive of the strange phenomenon in the sky, at least on the surface. Everyone looked very calm, and everyone believed that man could conquer nature. Anyway, even if the sky collapsed, there were still 6 perfected lords of the divine transformation realm to hold it up. They were not afraid, and since they did not leave, what did they have to be afraid of? Fear came from ignorance. For example, the mortals in the immortal city at the foot of the mountain, each and every one of them dragged their families and fled desperately, wanting to leave the most prosperous city in the world as soon as possible. It was extremely ridiculous. Of course, at this time, there were also some impatient cultivators who wanted to know the opinions and attitudes of the few big shots. However, from the beginning of the strange phenomenon in the sky until now, all the perfected lords of the divine transformation realm had been silent. They did not come out to boost the morale, saying that it was just a change in the sky, nor did they come out to warn the crowd that it was very dangerous, and that everyone should run for their lives. They did not come out to tell the crowd that they should not be afraid, and that they were here to hold everything up. In short, they seemed to have suddenly lost their voices, living silently in those tall and magnificent palaces, without saying a word. This was, of course, a very puzzling thing. Many people did not dare to say much on the surface, but in private, there were many speculations, but not to the extent of how bad it was. In fact, most of them were actually conspiracy theories. Based on past experience, everyone suspected that these few big shots were probably scheming against each other again, preparing to fight for power and profit, and kill everyone in a sea of blood, and so on and so forth. Lu Chen knew that what they said above was bullshit. Because as the person closest to perfected Lord Tianlan, he saw with his own eyes that Mount Sky Dragon, which had been relatively stable for the first 3 days of the strange phenomenon of the Blood Sea, began to become chaotic on the 4th day. The Blood Sea was still pressing in step by step, slowly pressing into the center. The area of the normal sky in the sky was getting smaller and smaller. Everyone knew that in the end, the Blood Sea would definitely devour everything. When that time came, who knew what would happen? On the night of the 4th day, it was a cold and mournful night. Lu Chen was the only one who was asked to stay by perfected Lord Tianlan to accompany him. Lu Chen asked the damn baldy why he asked him to stay, and perfected Lord Tianlan smiled without saying anything. He just patted him on the shoulder and said in a low voice, "Prepare to watch a good show." In the 3rd night watch period, a good show began. Sitting in the main hall of Kunlun, Lu Chen saw figures flashing outside the hall and the sound of footsteps. He and perfected Lord Tianlan went up to greet them. Looking at the damn baldy's expression, it was obvious that he already knew what was going to happen. Before walking to the entrance of the Great Hall, Lu Chen had already made many guesses about the people who might come tonight. The subordinates of the Floating Clouds Agency, Blood Warbler, Old Ma, or even some extremely well-hidden shadow. Did they suddenly have something important to report? Or maybe some enemies with bad intentions, such as Supreme Guangbo of Dazai Yard, Supreme Tiehu of Heavenly Law Hall, or even Supreme Guyu of Starry Hall? When everyone's struggle for power and profit had reached the climax, should they draw their swords and fight each other? However, none of this was the case. When Lu Chen saw the people at the door, he felt that his brain was not enough to process it. At the same time, he vaguely felt that what was going to happen this time was probably a little bigger than what he had expected, although he already felt that his expectation was exaggerated. The person who came was of high status and usually kept a low profile, but even when perfected Lord Tianlan saw him, he had to greet him with a smile, cupped his hands, and called him elder brother. His name was Golden Dragon. Perfected Lord Golden Dragon of the 6 perfected lords of Zhengxianmeng. Chapter 645. Zhengxianmeng was the most powerful force in the world, and its greatest asset was, of course, the 6 divine transformation stage perfected cultivators, who were unparalleled in the Immortal Alliance. With these great figures who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world, their powerful subordinates, and the famous sects behind them, Zhangxianmeng could enjoy the limitless glory it had today. However, if a person who knew nothing about Zhangxianmeng had only heard about Zhangxianmeng in the past few years, then 3 to 5 years ago, he would probably think that there was only one big shot in Zhangxianmeng called Perfected Tianlan. But in the past 2 years, he might have learned about a few other big shots, such as Perfected Taihu, Perfected Guangbo, and Perfected Guyu. As for the other 2 divine transformation stage perfected cultivators, Perfected Golden Dragon and Perfected Lu Yun, their presence had always been very weak, as if they were a little weaker than the previous 4 divine transformation stage perfected cultivators. Of course, that wasn't the case. True Monarch Golden Dragon and True Monarch Lu Yun were both from prestigious sects and had the backing of prestigious sections. They also had the assistance of forces that couldn't be underestimated, so they definitely couldn't be underestimated. Of course, no one in the world dared to look down on a divine transformation stage perfected cultivator, except for a certain madman. However, compared to the glorious achievements of perfected Tianlan and Fuyunji, these 2 perfected cultivators were much more ordinary. Of course, in the face of the rare achievement of destroying the devil cult, even Taihu, Guangbo, and the other famous divine transformation stage perfected cultivators did not have an easy time in the past few years. Actually, everyone was about the same. Only Taihu, Guangbo, and the others would jump around a few times and make their presence known in front of the world from time to time. At the same time, they would fight for some benefits in the dark, which made people think that their strength was second only to Fuyunji. In terms of age and eloquence, Perfected Golden Dragon was actually the oldest among the 6 perfected cultivators. Unfortunately, the true battle prowess of a deity transformation stage true monarch wasn't judged by how long one lived, and the rise and fall of the major powers had nothing to do with age. In the Vanity Fair of Immortal City and Zhangxianmeng, everyone was very realistic. Whoever could get the most benefits would be the boss. As for things like justice, and so on, everyone just talked about it. When it was time to fight, no one was soft-hearted. Thus, after all these years, true monarch Golden Dragon was actually a person of high status, but the development of his forces was not very satisfactory, and he was slowly being marginalized. Lu Chen had met this true monarch once, and the location was, of course, at the ceremony where he was officially accepted as a disciple by true monarch Tianlan. He remembered very clearly that on that day, almost all the important figures in Zhangxianmeng had come. It seemed that everyone gave face to perfected monarch Tianlan, whose power was at its peak. Even if they didn't befriend him, at least they wouldn't turn bad and become enemies, right? It was with this kind of thinking that the damn Baldi and Lu Chen made a huge fortune at that ceremony. Perfected Golden Dragon was an uninvited guest, but this time, perfected monarch Tianlan, who was too lazy to socialize and rude to most people, unexpectedly came to the door to personally welcome him. Then, the 2 exchanged greetings and were very friendly. In the end, perfected monarch Tianlan even held perfected Golden Dragon's arm intimately, and the 2 of them walked side by side into the main hall of Kunlun. The surrounding servants had already been sent away, leaving only Lu Chen alone in the main hall. Perfected monarch Tianlan also did something even more unfathomable. He directly asked Lu Chen to close all the doors and windows around the main hall, isolating all the curious and prying eyes outside. As a result, the only people in the world who knew about the conversation between the divine transformation stage perfected monarchs were the 3 people in the main hall. The news quickly spread from Fuyunji. Xueying and the other leaders of Fuyunji quickly arrived with their elite troops. They quietly surrounded and guarded the main hall, and at the same time, drove away the spies in the open and in the dark, intentionally or unintentionally, a little further away. These things were done very appropriately and skillfully, because they had done this many times in the past. But this time, there was an additional face in the crowd that was somewhat familiar, but also a little strange at the same time. It was the newly promoted Deputy Hall Master of Fuyunji, Ma Xiaoyun. Actually, there were many people who knew old Ma. Although he was not well known in the past, he had a soft hand in the dark and had a wide circle of friends. Otherwise, he would not have been so well informed, and had been Lu Chen's most reliable source of information for a long time. Because of this, most people in Fuyunji saw Old Ma as being on the same side as Lu Chen. Especially after Lu Chen was accepted as a disciple by Lord Tianlan, Old Ma became the #1 confidant of Lu Chen, the future master of Fuyunji, and his status also rose a lot. However, the world was unpredictable, and it was even more common in a treacherous place like Zhengxianmeng. Old Ma suddenly left Lu Chen, and became the deputy hall master of Fuyunji in one fell swoop. This change surprised many people. The deputy hall master of Fuyunji, and it was said that he was also in charge of the affairs of the shadow. He had a high position and power. No matter how they looked at it, it was like the old saying that was used on Lu Chen, reaching the sky in one step. Could it be that people on Lu Chen's side were born with this saying? It was so enviable. Old Ma stood in the crowd with a somewhat complicated expression on his face as he looked at the tall and grand hall that was currently closed. No one knew what he was thinking at this moment, but he had arranged all the matters at hand without any mistakes. About 5 or 6 feet away from Old Ma, Shuang had a similar expression on her face as she looked at the Kunlun Hall. Her charming face was frowning slightly, and her expression was even more serious. This was because she knew that after today, the rumors that Lu Chen's position was unstable would be discredited. What else could prove how much Supreme Lord Tianlan valued Lu Chen than the fact that a demigod true lord would stay by his side during a private negotiation? Those rumors of discord between master and disciple had been spread for nothing. Shuang sighed sorrowfully in her heart. Looking at the hall, she muttered to herself with some resentment in her heart, my lord, what exactly are you thinking? Could it be that my decades of following and exhausting myself are really not as good as that one Lu Chen? If you continue to force me like this, I really don't know what to do. She thought this in her heart, but she did not show any of it on her face. She stood quietly in front of the Kunlun Hall, just like she had done for the past 10 years. Her back was straight, her face was charming but cold, and she had turned herself into the sharpest blade in Supreme Lord Tianlan's hands, protecting him and blocking all hostility far away from him. However, she still had a feeling that after today, things might be different. Chapter 646. True Lord Golden Dragon was the oldest of the 6 perfected cultivators in Zhengxianmeng, and he was also the most low-key one. Perhaps it was because he was old and had seen too many changes in the ways of the world, but this old man seemed to have become indifferent to many things. He rarely stood out and fought with others for things. Of course, the calmness mentioned above was only relative. In reality, true immortal Golden Dragon's strength was not weak. Normally, he would be able to get a share of the profits, so his days could be considered quite comfortable. It was only in the last few decades that the madman, true Lord Tianlan, suddenly rose to power and swept across the world with the floating clouds office that he had created. Not only did he defeat the devil cult and the evil path, but in reality, there was also a division of interests within the righteous path's true immortal alliance. When Fuyunji had just developed, these things were not obvious. Most people, including the other perfected cultivators in the divine transformation realm, did not think too highly of this rising star. The true immortal alliance had been established for several thousand years. How many outstanding talents, how many changes in the world, everyone had seen many of them. But no one expected the times to change, and the madman took over. After true Lord Tianlan defeated the devil cult, he came back to steal from the alliance of the righteous faction, not giving them any face at all. To be exact, before Fuyunji defeated the devil cult, they had begun to fight with the forces within Zhengxianmeng, both openly and secretly. This did not seem to be a wise move. There were strong enemies outside, and they still had to fight among themselves. It seemed like a suicidal move. But the reality was that the other forces within the Alliance of Immortals all felt the threat of Fuyunji, and they all began to secretly suppress them. This kind of fight was not up to Fuyunji alone. Fortunately, this world, which was supposed to teach the rising star how to behave according to the rules, finally met a madman who did not follow the rules, and this madman was very powerful. True Lord Tianlan and his Fuyunji finally broke the rules, became the boss, and grabbed the biggest piece of the cake. In the face of powerful deterrence, another rule of this world quickly came into play, and that was the survival of the fittest. The other forces in the alliance of immortals easily bowed their heads, and everyone lived in peace for the time being. After that fight, True Lord Golden Dragon and the other perfected Lord Luyun kept a low profile and did not show up much. Most of the time, they only said that they were in seclusion. Instead, the other younger perfected lords, such as Guangbo, Tai Hu, and Guyu, were still struggling outside. This was the sequence of events. Speaking of which, True Monarch Gold Dragon was more or less forced by True Monarch Tian Lan and his Floating Clouds company. However, on this night in Kunlun Palace, True Monarch Gold Dragon appeared to be very gratified as he chatted happily with True Monarch Tian Lan. As the only person in the hall who was watching these two big shots, Lu Chen saw their words and actions as he poured tea, and his heart was not calm either. These two perfected lords of the divine transformation realm seemed to be chatting about their daily lives, and did not mention the general trend of the world. As for the imminent appearance of the blood sea in the sky, they seemed to treat it as if it had never happened and did not exist. They did not mention a word about it. If the people outside saw or heard this scene with their own eyes, they would probably be stunned, because even Lu Chen himself was secretly thinking that these two big shots would probably have a fierce exchange of words, or bargain for the sake of great benefits, or simply plan some terrifying and frightening conspiracy. In the end, none of them happened. True Lord Golden Dragon looked back on his life and the many years he had spent on Mount Celestial Dragon in Zhengxianmeng, and he sighed with emotion. Perfected Lord Tianlan repeatedly said yes, and even said that when he had just arrived, he had been taken care of by True Lord Golden Dragon. Now that he thought about it, it seemed like a lifetime had passed. True Lord Golden Dragon laughed heartily, saying that he had already seen that perfected Lord Tianlan was a young man with great talent, and that he would definitely achieve great things in the future. Now, it had really come true. Perfected Lord Tianlan modestly said that this was all because he had learned from his predecessor, and that he had achieved this little achievement by standing on the shoulders of a giant like his predecessor. Lu Chen couldn't help but cast a sidelong glance at him because his words were so mushy and his manners were so courteous. He thought to himself, could it be that this damnable Baldy has been possessed by a ghost? I've never seen him so courteous to someone in over 10 years. After chatting for a while, True Lord Golden Dragon actually stood up and took his leave. During this time, Lu Chen did not hear anything useful. For a moment, he was also confused by this old man. It was not easy for him to come here, so why did he come? It couldn't really be just for a chat, could it? Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be especially calm, and he sent True Lord Golden Dragon to the door with a smile. However, the moment before the door opened, True Lord Golden Dragon suddenly sighed, looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan, and said, "Sure enough, the new generation excels the old. I didn't expect you to be even calmer than this old man." Lu Chen's spirit was instantly lifted, and he looked at the damn Baldy out of the corner of his eye, only to see Perfected Lord Tianlan smiling and saying, "Senior, you flatter me. If you have something to say, please feel free to say it." True Lord Golden Dragon stared at him for a long time, and after a long silence, he suddenly opened his mouth. His expression was a little desolate for the first time that night, and he said, "Tonight, I originally wanted to join the game. Whether it was on your side, Tiehu, or Guangbo's side, it would be good if I could get something." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled without saying anything, and his expression was gentle. Perfected Lord Golden Dragon said indifferently, "Did I tell you that when you suddenly stop being crazy and become polite and considerate, you look even scarier?" This time, Perfected Lord Tianlan was startled, and then he laughed. "That's not true." As he said that, he even turned his head to look at Lu Chen, and said with a smile, "Is that true?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, and then said, "Yes." Perfected Lord Tianlan and Perfected Lord Golden Dragon both looked at Lu Chen's face, and after a while, the two looked at each other and smiled. Perfected Lord Golden Dragon nodded. "Your disciple is not bad." Perfected Lord Tianlan actually had no intention of being polite. He said, "That's true, or else I wouldn't have liked him." Perfected Lord Golden Dragon pointed at him, and then he frowned and said with a solemn expression, "I'll withdraw from Mountly and Mountly. I won't take advantage of you, and I won't part with the money. How about it?" Perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be surprised at these words, and as if he was getting to know this old man all over again, he sized him up and said, "You actually want to leave? Are your subordinates willing?" Perfected Lord Golden Dragon said indifferently, "I should be the one in charge of the sect. If I say I want to leave, I'll naturally leave. If there's anyone who isn't willing, then don't stay under me." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him for a while, and suddenly asked, "Did you discover something, and that's why you came to find me?" Perfected Lord Golden Dragon smiled. "That's not important. I'm just asking you, my lineage isn't willing to be enemies with you, and I also don't want to stay on this celestial dragon mountain any longer after seeing the terrifying phenomenon in the sky. I want to bring my descendants back to my hometown to live for a few years. There are many implications in this. I wonder if you want to force me to stay as an enemy, or let this old man live?" Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a long time, and finally nodded. There are indeed crouching tigers and hidden dragons among the heroes of the world. You can't underestimate them. With that, he waved his sleeve and bowed solemnly, and said seriously, "Senior, please leave. We'll meet again if fate allows it." Perfected Lord Golden Dragon chuckled, and turned to open the door to leave. However, his voice traveled far, and he said, "Forget it. It's best if I don't see you for the rest of my life." Chapter 647. There are truly too many smart people in this world. Lu Chen thought to himself as he watched True Monarch Golden Dragon's departing figure. This was especially true in this immortal city, which was known as the largest city in the world, where the best talents in the world gathered. Those who could climb up from Zhengxianmeng were all elites. Those who were not as experienced in the ways of the world would have long been swept away, buried, silent, or died a silent death somewhere. Mount Heavenly Dragon was vast and majestic, but the highest peak was still extremely narrow, small to the point that only a few people could stand. Moreover, the path from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain was already packed with people. There were many precipitous cliffs along the way, and every time one stuck one's head out to look into the deep valley, one would see piles of white bones below, and they were all traces left behind by those who had failed. In terms of the intensity of the struggle for power and profit, Zhengxianmeng was even worse than the devil cult. However, it was in such a fierce and cruel Vanity Fair that True Immortal Golden Dragon, who had stood at the top for many years, suddenly retreated. Although Lu Chen could feel from the negotiation just now that this veteran perfected god of transformation seemed to have some other intentions at the beginning, if True Immortal Tianlan did not respond well, or if True Immortal Golden Dragon sensed some clues that he could take advantage of, perhaps True Immortal Golden Dragon would change his face and join the battle ferociously. But now it seemed that all this was just wishful thinking. After a seemingly indifferent chat with True Immortal Golden Dragon, True Immortal Golden Dragon suddenly made such a big decision and retreated without any hesitation. He even asked for a promise from True Immortal Tianlan. Lu Chen didn't know whether True Immortal Golden Dragon had sensed some kind of danger, or if he had suddenly been seized by a sudden impulse to look at the surging sea of blood. In short, this big shot had suddenly appeared and left overnight, taking with him a powerful force and leaving behind an empty space that was enough to make people drool with greed. What should we do? Lu Chen asked True Immortal Tianlan beside him. True Immortal Tianlan asked in return, "What should we do?" Lu Chen said, after True Immortal Golden Dragon left, he left behind so many properties and profits. Should we rob them? Snatch? Without any hesitation, Perfected Lord Tianlan said in a righteous manner, "There's no reason for us not to rob. The reason why the old man came to inform us was to show him some respect and let him leave unscathed. As for the meat he left behind, it's just our intention. If I don't snatch it, that old man will laugh at me." "Oh." Lu Chen nodded and said, "That's right." Then he paused and said, "How about this? You've been very busy recently, so let me help you with this kind of hard work. How about it?" Perfected Lord Tianlan was stunned for a moment and suddenly sized up Lu Qin. After a while, he suddenly chuckled and said, "You're enlightened, lad. It's all because of your guidance." "I'm a slow learner and I've disappointed you," Lu Qin said calmly. Perfected Lord Tianlan laughed out loud and clapped. "Approved. Let me see what you're capable of. Don't lose to those trash from the other halls." Lu Qin said, "Of course not. However, even the cleverest housewife can't cook a meal without rice. Since you've asked me to do this, shouldn't you at least transfer some of the men from the Floating Clouds agency to me?" Perfected Lord Tianlan squinted his eyes slightly, but the smile was still on his face. He even clicked his tongue and nodded. "I thought you were going to show me some unparalleled divine power or some uncanny scheme to complete this great undertaking on your own. Why are you still asking me for men in the end?" Lu Qin said, "I'm not an immortal. Anyway, as long as you give me men and those old soul formation cultivators don't show up, I'll definitely settle this matter for you." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded and pondered for a moment. It seemed that he didn't care much about Lu Qin's request. He said, "With me sitting here, if I don't show up, I don't think Tai Hu, Guangbo, and those other trash will dare to come out and fight for you. So, it's probably up to you juniors to rely on your own abilities. Later, I'll give you an order to get a batch of elites from Fuyunji to follow you." Lu Qin said straightforwardly, "Don't go back after you follow me." Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him with a faint smile. After a moment of silence, he said, "Isn't your table manners too ugly?" Lu Qin snorted and said, "In the past, I was too concerned about table manners and was polite in everything. I always thought that there was still a long way to go, so I had to leave some face for now. Unfortunately, they didn't appreciate it. Now that I think about it, I'm really stupid. From the beginning, when you took me in as your disciple, you probably didn't want someone who was tactful and timid, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan first shook his head, then nodded and said, "Tactful and worldly wise isn't a bad thing. In life, if you blindly advance bravely, you'll only hurt yourself and others. But you're someone who's going to do great things in the future, so you still need to have the courage and the nature of a tiger and wolf." He patted Lu Qin's shoulder with a somewhat gratified look in his eyes. "Fortunately, you've finally thought it through." When Perfected Lord Tianlan turned around and walked into the depths of the hall, Lu Qin suddenly said to his back, "Shuang should still be loyal to you." Perfected Lord Tianlan's footsteps paused for a moment, but he didn't turn around. He only asked calmly, "Why do you suddenly say that?" As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something. After pondering for a moment, he said, "I remember that recently, you and Shuang seemed to be at odds with each other. Why are you speaking up for her today?" Lu Qin said, "These are two separate matters. I just want to say that I'll naturally do what I have to do. But doing this is equivalent to dividing Shui Ying's authority. Will she have any reaction? It's fine if she hates me, but if she's dissatisfied with you, have you thought it through?" Perfected Lord Tianlan fell silent. After a while, he finally turned around again and looked at Lu Qin with a deep gaze. He said, "Why does it sound like you're trying to sow discord?" "A little." Lu Qin actually admitted it in an unusually frank manner. From his expression, he didn't seem to mind at all. He said, "But you can't deny that what I said is the truth. Shuang has been with you for more than 20 years and is your closest confidant. I didn't think that I would become a fool in the end." Perfected Lord Tianlan frowned and looked at Lu Qin. "What are you trying to say?" Lu Qin met his gaze and walked up to him. "Are you suspicious of her and are purposely trying to reduce her authority?" His voice wasn't too loud, but his words were still very clear. The hall was silent for a while. Then, Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled with a somewhat emotional expression. "Even Shuang doesn't dare to speak to me like that," Lu Qin said, "so, you took me in as your disciple." Perfected Lord Tianlan couldn't help but laugh. The atmosphere in the hall immediately relaxed. He looked at Lu Qin and turned to leave with a smile. He didn't reply to Lu Qin's question. It was just that after a while, a low voice came from the direction of Perfected Lord Tianlan's figure. I heard that in the past 10 years, there have been many new people in Fuyunji who only know Hallmaster Shui but not perfected Lord Tianlan. Lu Chen stood in the empty hall and silently lowered his head. After a long time, his lonely body trembled slightly. Chapter 648. Many people had seen true immortal Gold Dragon go to Fuyunji's territory and meet true immortal Tianlan in the main hall of Kunlun. However, the cunning true immortal Tianlan did not let those spies have a good time and talked behind closed doors. Except for Lu Chen, no one else knew the details. This also caused the other forces on Mount Celestial Dragon to speculate. There were all kinds of speculations. Did the two big shots fall out, collude, or fight for power? Everyone was thinking about all kinds of possibilities. But soon, true immortal Gold Dragon, who was unusually agile this time, made a decision and action that shocked the entire Zhengxianmeng. He was retiring and returning to his hometown. Of course, this was a joke, but true immortal Gold Dragon really announced to the public that he was old and weak, and that he missed his hometown. He was going to leave Mount Celestial Dragon and return to his home sect, along with a large group of subordinates. Zhengxianmeng was not the imperial court of the secular world, and true immortal Gold Dragon was not an ordinary person. In the world of cultivation, how could a divinity transformation stage perfected cultivator like him retire and return to his hometown? There must be something fishy about it. Everyone immediately realized this, but for the time being, apart from those involved, no one knew the truth. With such a great force leaving, the power vacuum and various benefits left behind were enough to make people salivate. Everyone could only be happy, so how could they go back to stop it? Therefore, all the famous people came out to sing praises for true immortal Gold Dragon, saying that he had worked hard these years and that it was time for him to go home and enjoy his old age. The rest of the troublesome work and the work of fighting for the justice of the world should be left to the young people. Of course, there were also different voices of opposition in the True Immortal Alliance. Most of them came from True Immortal Golden Dragon's own forces. Among them, there were many young talents who were in high spirits. How could they be willing to leave the center of power, the world's largest Vanity Fair, the most flourishing, dazzling, and bewitching city of luxury? Thus, he jumped out and strongly objected. True Immortal Gold Dragon used a very straightforward method to suppress these disharmonious youngsters who didn't agree with his boss. If I say I'm leaving, I'm leaving. If you don't listen, I'll beat you until you listen. If you don't listen, I'll break up with you. Our fate ends here. Don't follow me after I leave. Go with someone else. This caused quite a commotion. After all, the human heart was full of desires. Everyone wanted to climb up as fast as they could. You, True Immortal Golden Dragon, have been in that position for so many years. Presumably, you've enjoyed everything you can. If you want to retreat now, no one will care. But if you want to retreat, so be it. If you insist on blocking someone else's path, then you are an enemy. As a result, there was a lot of commotion, chaos, and everyone went to their own homes. In the end, Golden Dragon True Monarch left Celestial Dragon Mountain with half of his followers, while the rest were quickly divided up by the other forces. From this, it could be seen that although the Zhengxianmeng organization was terrifyingly powerful, in terms of internal cohesion, it really couldn't compare to those famous sects that had thousands of years of inheritance. There were too many opportunistic and scheming people. Everyone was smart and had their own ideals to fight for. The forces under a divine transformation stage True Monarch were once powerful, but once they decided to retreat, they would instantly shrink by half. This was like an ugly beach that had been exposed after the tide had receded, naked in front of the whole world. The blood sea anomaly in the sky didn't stop. It was still spreading and pressing toward the sky above the immortal city. However, the phenomenon this time was completely different from the previous ones. At the same time, the invisible resistance seemed to be far stronger than before. After a few days, the torrential sea of blood still covered less than half of the sky, and its speed was much slower than the previous ones. But no one knew if there would be a next time after this blood sea anomaly. Perhaps the sky above their heads would never be able to see the original light again? When such a terrifying and strange anomaly was happening above their heads, the atmosphere on Celestial Dragon Mountain and the Immortal City didn't change much. It seemed that too many people didn't care about the atmosphere of the apocalypse. In their eyes, fame and fortune were more important. After defeating the devil cult, the whole world and the vast land of the divine continent were invincible. On the towering Celestial Dragon Mountain, these cultivators who stood at the peak of the human race finally fought among themselves. Humans were really animals that loved infighting. Perhaps seeing the blood of their own kind would make most people excited. Luchan felt that he was about to become such a person. He led a group of Fuyunji elites to fight and kill for the interests of those empty foundations in Celestial Dragon Mountain, the Immortal City, and even in various dark corners. He clearly felt that recently, everyone seemed to have become more aggressive. It was probably because they didn't care much about their face for the sake of benefits. That thing is mine, no one else is allowed to touch it. If you touch my things, I'll take your life. Therefore, the Immortal City began to bleed and die. Even if the blood sea anomaly above their heads had not yet closed, and the doomsday had not yet arrived, people had already begun to kill each other. Luchan felt very funny in his heart. Then, he performed the best and most valiant in the infighting. Under his excellent leadership and performance, Fuyunji once again showed its powerful strength in the infighting in Zhengxianmeng. It repeatedly defeated those who were sent to fight for territory and interests, such as Heavenly Law Hall, Dezayuan, and Starry Hall, making him famous. This was because the number of people assigned to him was, at most, less than half of the Floating Clouds Company's elites. In other words, Lu Chen had led half of his people to utterly defeat the other halls, seizing the biggest piece of cake in this bandit's feast. His performance was very outstanding. He commanded calmly, he was fearless of life and death. He even personally killed several people in front of others. When he used the blade or even his hand to stab the enemy's chest, there seemed to be a smile on his face sometimes. Among the Floating Cloud Service's men who followed him, there were quite a few who vividly described the scene at that time. Afterwards, they said with certainty that Lu Chen's expression at that time was very similar to true Lord Tian Lan's when he was young. It was even possible to say that they were carved from the same mold. This sentence was really memorable, and it quickly spread throughout the whole of Fuyunji and Zhengxianmeng. When the overall situation was almost settled, Supreme Tianlan completely ignored the other infuriated good-for-nothings and publicly praised Lu Chen. He laughed out loud and unceremoniously gave most of the properties that he had robbed to Lu Chen, and then assigned those subordinates to Lu Chen. In the blink of an eye, the strength in Lu Chen's hands was already vaguely similar to that of the second Fuyunji. In Zhengxianmeng, who else could be a match for such a terrifying Supreme Tianlan and Fuyunji? If one could not do it, then the people who were stimulated could only speed up the pace of the alliance. The atmosphere became more and more tense, like a surging sea of blood in the sky that was slowly but gradually approaching a desperate situation. A bloody smell grew thicker and thicker on Mount Celestial Dragon. Even many years later, when the survivors who had experienced that scene recalled it, they would find it strange. There were so many cultivators, so many smart people, but why were all of them so bloodthirsty and excited? Chapter 649. Looking down from the top of the Celestial Dragon Mountain, one could see the bustling Immortal City as far as the eye could see. At a glance, there were endless layers of pavilions that seemed to extend beyond one's sight to the horizon. Even the people who lived in the biggest city in the world all year round could not help but sigh at the magnificence of this city again. This was the biggest center of power in the world, and also the biggest Vanity Fair in the world. It was something that countless cultivators dreamed of. No matter what kind of request it was, it could be realized in this city. Of course, it was just a possibility. Cultivators were also human, and they also had desires and emotions. When Old Ma stood on the top of the mountain and looked down, he had a similar feeling in his heart. Now, Old Ma could be considered to have experienced the feeling of reaching the sky in one step. Perhaps the height of this climb was still a little lower than Lu Chen's, but it did not matter. The position of the deputy chief of Fuyunji was already a position that countless ordinary cultivators in Zhengxiameng dreamed of. His fat body stood on the mountain. When the mountain breeze blew, perhaps he did not have the elegant bearing of a tree in the wind, but old Ma himself felt very good. He should be a little more handsome than before, right? Then, he pursed his lips and revealed a slightly bitter smile where no one could see. The city at the foot of the mountain looked quiet and peaceful, and it was as prosperous as before. However, as a high-level person who had obtained a certain status, old Ma also knew more secrets and news than before. He knew that under the peace, there was a bloodshed slowly spreading. The atmosphere on the celestial dragon mountain was still relatively calm, but the few important halls actually did not interact much with each other. Everyone kept their distance, and when they met on the road, their eyes were filled with vigilance and hostility, lest this inexplicable and gradually fierce civil war suddenly spread to them. Yes, in the seemingly peaceful Zhengxiameng, even though everyone acted as if nothing had happened, in fact, this could no longer be considered an ordinary dispute in the immortal city, but a fierce battle in the dark. Although bleeding, injuries, and broken limbs looked terrible, it was still within the scope of control. However, in the immortal city, in order to fight for the power vacuum after true Lord Golden Dragon left, the battle soon developed to the point of death. Everyone was a cultivator, an elite, very strong, and also very smart. By the way, everyone seemed to be in a bad mood recently. There was a stifling feeling in their hearts, and they always wanted a place to vent it. Normally, they were all under the same true immortal alliance, so they had to take into consideration their faces and the forces of the various halls. None of them dared to act recklessly. However, in the past few days, all the people under the halls seemed to have suddenly discovered a frightening fact. That was, it seemed that killing people was no big deal. After the first person died, the scale of this battle began to expand rapidly. Everyone's attacks became fiercer and fiercer. Every slash was not to scare people away, but to really want to see blood and kill people. Sometimes, even people who were usually more gentle could not help but become cruel and ruthless killers under such an atmosphere. In this chaotic battle, Fuyunji relied on its own powerful strength to gain the upper hand. At the same time, many people also saw the performance of the future successor of true Lord Tianlan. Lu Chen looked like a killer among killers. Old Ma heard a lot about Lu Chen's performance during this period of time, and he was a little worried about it. For some reason, he felt that something was not quite right, but he could not put his finger on it. He only felt that Lu Chen had been with him for many years. At least, the Lu Chen he knew in the past should not be such a person. But old Ma was not completely sure in his heart, because he also knew more deeply than others that Lu Chen was once the best shadow in the world. This person could even completely change himself into another person when needed, including his personality. He used this powerful and terrifying ability to severely damage the Devil Sect, and laid the foundation for the destruction of the Devil Sect. Therefore, although old Ma felt that something was not quite right, he still could not be sure whether Lu Chen was still pretending or not. This person, even his old friends of more than 10 to 20 years, did not dare to say that they could completely recognize him. How scary was that? Old Ma shook his head, and the worry on his face deepened. The road under the city in the distance, on the ancient road leading to the outside of the immortal city, now looked very lively, and it looked like a contrast with the bustling immortal city. But most of the people walking on the road, the densely packed people, were people who were in a hurry to leave. There was an inexplicable and strange phenomenon above their heads. In this city on the ground, there were fights and killings every 2 or 3 days. You could even see blood splattering and corpses everywhere in the streets. This kind of place was suitable for ambitious people and adventurers, not for ordinary people who wanted to live in peace. Old Ma sighed and sat down on the spot. He had stood in this place for a long time, and also waited for a long time. Places that were rarely visited were usually places with extremely dangerous peaks or harsh environments. Perhaps such places would occasionally have beautiful scenery, but after a long time, it was actually very uncomfortable. Damn it. Old Ma muttered, as if he was cursing, but also as if he was complaining about something. After a while, he sighed and seemed to be a little discouraged. At this moment of silence, even the mountain breeze suddenly became a little quiet. Old Ma narrowed his eyes slightly and looked into the distance. Suddenly, he only felt a pain on his back, as if a hard object had suddenly pressed against his back. Unbeknownst to anyone, there was something so close to him. In an instant, Old Ma's face turned pale. His fat body suddenly tightened at this moment, and his spiritual power suddenly gathered. When he saw that the strength he had hidden for many years was about to burst out in an instant, the words behind his back were like a basin of cold water poured over his whole body. Lu Chen asked me to say hello to you. The voice was low but soft, and it sounded like a woman. At the same time, the hard object seemed to be particularly sharp, and it instantly pierced through his clothes and went straight to his back. Old Ma seemed to be frozen. He stood stiffly in the same place and did not dare to look back. The expression on his face looked very strange. After a moment of silence, he whispered, "Lu Chen?" "Yes." "What are you going to do?" Old Ma asked. "Kill you," the person behind him said, and the tone of the voice seemed to have changed again. Old Ma sighed and said, "If you want to kill me, just kill me. Why do you have to pretend to be him?" The person behind him made a sound of surprise and said, "Didn't you just betray him? Is it wrong for Lu Chen to want to kill you?" Old Ma shook his head and said, "He won't kill me, and he didn't send you." The person behind him was silent. Old Ma smiled bitterly, then slowly took a step forward, letting his body slowly move away from the sharp blade on his back. Only then did he turn his head to look at the charming woman behind him. He smiled bitterly and said, "That's right, Old Ma. Miss Song, you will scare me to death by doing this." Chapter 650. I didn't expect it to be you. Song Wenji, the most cherished adopted daughter of the first seed of Heavenly Law Hall Immortal Tiehu, who was known for her enchanting beauty and at the same time, was also an outstanding talent of the young generation in the Union of True Immortals. Standing behind Old Ma, she looked at him, frowned slightly and suddenly said such a sentence. Old Ma didn't seem to be surprised or angry at Song Wenji's somewhat brainless words. He even nodded and said, "More or less, I also didn't expect it to be you." Song Wenji didn't say anything. Her beautiful eyes flickered and stared at the fat face of Old Ma, her gaze as sharp as a knife. Old Ma took a step back and raised his hands as if to express his helplessness and harmlessness. He said, all right, I didn't mean anything else." Song Wenji snorted and put away a strange weapon in her hand. Old Ma took advantage of this gap and secretly glanced at her hand. In that hasty glance, he felt that the weapon seemed to be a bit like a strange hook. But Song Wenji's movements were very fast. That weapon disappeared from her hand in an instant and no one knew where it went. Why not Lu Chen? Song Wenji sneered and looked at Old Ma with a bit of ridicule in her eyes. She said, "Could it be that the person he trusts the most is you? It seems that Lu Chen is just a chess piece on the surface." Old Ma shook his head and said seriously, "How can we guess the thoughts of that person?" Song Wenji curled her lips and looked as if she didn't care. Then she said, "All right, let's not talk nonsense. What does that person want from me?" Old Ma took out a sealed envelope from his bosom and handed it to her. He said, "He didn't tell me either. He just gave me this letter and asked me to pass it to you. He said that you would know what to do after reading it." Song Wenji's expression changed slightly. She stared at the letter for a moment and was about to reach out to take it when she suddenly retracted her hand. She then took out a pair of thin leather gloves from her bosom and put them on. Only then did she solemnly receive the letter. He looked as if he was facing a formidable enemy, as if he was afraid that the letter would be laced with poison, or that the thin letter contained some extremely dangerous and frightening mechanism. Old Ma was also a little stunned. After a while, he couldn't help but say, "It can't be like this, right?" Song Wenji glanced at him indifferently and said, "If you say it's not necessary, then it's not necessary. I'm not familiar with you. Besides, who knows if you've colluded with someone in secret to harm me?" Old Ma was speechless. He just waved his hand and said nothing. Song Wenji carefully opened the letter and took out a piece of paper from the envelope. She was very careful throughout the process, but things were just as old Ma said. Nothing happened. Song Wenji remained calm and composed. She didn't feel embarrassed at all. On the contrary, she even took 2 steps back, further away from old Ma. Only then did she open the letter and read it, looking like she didn't believe anyone at all. Old Ma also felt helpless. He thought about it and decided to show that he didn't have any ulterior motives, so he simply took a few steps back. Song Wenji was originally about to read the letter, but at this time, she slightly raised her eyes to look at him. But that was all. She didn't show any other expression on this charming woman. Then, her gaze focused on the letter and she carefully read it. Old Ma had the letter for a long time, but he really didn't peek at what was written on the letter along the way. First, he didn't have this intention, and second, he really didn't dare to. But this matter clearly showed that what was written in the letter was the most important, so he also stared at Song Wenji, wanting to see something from her expression. But from beginning to end, Song Wenji's expression didn't change at all. It was as if she had just finished reading an ordinary letter that didn't matter. After she finished reading, she silently folded the letter with her thin leather-gloved hands, and then she rubbed her hands a few times. Suddenly, a flame emerged from her palms. Green smoke rose, and the paper was ignited. Old Ma subconsciously took a step forward. Song Wenji raised her head and looked at him. Old Ma immediately stopped and spread his hands to show that he didn't have any ulterior motives. Song Wenji faintly looked at him. The flame on her palms burned very quickly, and soon, the entire letter was swallowed up, and all the words on it were burned to ashes. The woman let go of her hands, and the flame dimmed. The ashes drifted away with the wind, and the disappeared words turned into nothingness, scattered between heaven and earth, and could no longer be found. Old Ma looked at her, and suddenly felt that the scene in front of him seemed a little familiar. It seemed like the young man from many years ago. They both stood in the dark shadows, silently and alone. In an environment that ordinary people might go crazy, they persevered and tenaciously lived. Sometimes, even old Ma himself would wonder what supported such a person. "I'm leaving," Song Wenji said very casually, as if nothing had happened before. "It's almost dawn." When she left, she seemed to say this with some emotion, and there was a bit of a gratified look on her face. Then, she really left this place, and didn't look back along the way. Old Ma stood where he was for a while, and then looked up at the sky. He saw the sea of blood in the sky, rolling and gloomy, still pressing towards the center of the city. The sky would only get darker and darker, and there was no sign of it getting brighter. Old Ma sighed, and turned to look at the ancient roads at the edge of the immortal city in the distance. He looked at the people who were still leaving the bustling city in an endless stream, and said to himself in a low voice, "It's not that Master doesn't trust him, maybe he wants to protect him. As for me..." His voice gradually became lower, and there was a bit of self-mockery on his face. His voice didn't sound too real. In the end, Lu Chen still felt that there seemed to be something wrong with him. The reason why he only realized it after a long time was because he finally realized that there seemed to be an important person missing from his side. In the past days, that seemingly useless fatty was actually the only one who would tell him the truth and give him timely advice. Now that he was gone, in this period of time, Lu Chen felt like he had returned to the feeling of being in the devil's sect in the past. He let go of the shackles in his heart, and looked down on life and death more and more. His attacks became heavier and heavier, and killing became easier and easier. Moreover, after killing, he would get a faint sense of pleasure. This was something that he had never encountered when he was in the devil's sect. Atsu woke him up. One morning, when he woke up, the first thing he saw was a pair of bloodthirsty red eyes. Lu Chen was shocked, and then suddenly, as if he was enlightened, he suddenly woke up from his trance. The events of the past few days quickly floated up in his mind, and then he broke out in a cold sweat from the shock. What the hell? Chapter 651. The pair of bloodthirsty, strange and ferocious-looking eyes were, of course, not a real evil spirit, nor was it a prank played in front of Lu Chen with a mirror. It was the black dog lying beside him, looking at him. Lu Chen was the person who knew Atsu the best in the world. After all, they had been together for so many years. Lu Chen knew that Atsu had many secrets that others did not know. For example, the black dog's bloodline as a divine beast, the process of its transformation into a holy beast, the green light that flashed in the depths of Atsu's eyes in the dark of the night, and the fact that after a life-and-death crisis, Atsu became the second existence in the world to possess the power of black fire. Yes, Lu Chen had never told anyone about Atsu's secrets, not even to the people who were once closest to him, Tianlan and Old Ma. Perhaps somewhere in his heart, he knew that at the last moment, the one who was most likely to be by his side was this black dog. But for so many years, Lu Chen had never seen Atsu's eyes shining with such a bright red light. They looked like two pools of blood, giving people a bloodthirsty desire. Lu Chen's heart trembled, and he subconsciously clenched his fists. At this moment, he seemed to suddenly wake up from a dream, only to find that he did not realize that he had been in a dream. Since when did this feeling start? Lu Chen slowly sat up and thought silently for a while. Then he turned his head to stare at Atsu again. Soon, he found that although there was a strange red in Atsu's eyes, the dog's mental state did not seem to be affected much. It was not the kind of bloodthirsty monster that would rush up and bite any living creature to death, then drink its blood and eat its flesh. It looked no different from before. The strange smell of blood dyed Atsu's eyes red, but it did not affect its mind. Lu Chen reached out and hugged Atsu, gently stroking its head. Although what he had experienced this time was very strange, he had indeed experienced too many things in the past years. In fact, similar things had happened in his memories. Atsu seemed to be particularly resistant to such strange attacks that could affect one's mind. Not to mention ordinary beasts, even most human cultivators were no match for it. There was nothing much to explain about this kind of powerful potential. If it had to be said, it could probably only be attributed to the powerful and abnormal divine beast bloodline in Atsu's body. Lu Chen even suspected that Atsu had something to do with his sudden awakening this morning, although he didn't know what Atsu had done. However, when he carefully thought about it, scenes began to emerge in his mind. In his memory, he had done a lot of things. If it was really a dream, Lu Chen probably remembered that he had once incarnated into a godlike figure, leading a large group of subordinates to fight unhindered. Blood flowed everywhere, as if it had smeared the entire huge city. Huh? Was the fight that fierce? Lu Chen sat on the bed and was stunned for a moment. He felt that his mind seemed to be a little confused. He vaguely remembered that he had led a group of elites of the Floating Clouds Company to fight against the people of the other halls in order to help true Lord Tianlan fight for his territory. However, this kind of fight was definitely a small-scale one, and it might not even be something that could be seen in public. Casualties were unavoidable, but there definitely wouldn't be any large-scale casualties. But why did it seem that in his memory, there were corpses everywhere and blood flowed? It seemed that something was not quite right. Lu Chen felt it, but for the time being, he couldn't figure it out. He shook his head, thinking that this inexplicable strange thing was very dangerous. Even he didn't know that he had fallen into a trap. Obviously, there was some terrible trap or strange thing around. Even if what he thought before might be an illusion, the thing that could produce such an illusion was also extremely terrifying. It should be known that it could even affect the mind of a cultivator like Lu Chen. Although Lu Chen had always been strong-willed and calm, at this time, the first person he thought of was still Supreme Tianlan. That damn Baldy should be able to see through the strangeness of this and solve these strange problems, right? Thinking of this, Lu Chen's originally somewhat uneasy heart suddenly calmed down a lot. He quickly felt the change in his mood. Although he was still vigilant for a moment, he couldn't help but feel a little funny. Why did he suddenly feel like he had suddenly returned to his childhood? He was still the child who held the damn Baldy's hand? He believed in him like that. Lu Chen shook his head gently and laughed somewhat self-deprecatingly. Just as he was about to turn over and get off the bed, his body suddenly stiffened the moment his feet touched the floor, and he stopped moving. At that moment, there was a sudden tumble in his mind, and actually more images came surging out. It was a scene that was even more intense and bloody. He led his men to victory in the battle for the territory of the immortal city, and when Fuyunji became even more arrogant and insufferably arrogant, for some unknown reason, the scale of this battle gradually began to expand. Originally, at this time, the big bosses of the various mountains in Zhengxianmeng, which were the few divine transformation perfected lords, should have appeared. Everyone would look at their respective profits and the number of casualties, and then they would sit down and have a good chat based on the current territory division, bargaining like businessmen. At most, they would each take a step back. Everyone would look good, and everyone would get some benefits. Then, everyone would be happy, and the world would be at peace. But this time, there was actually no such thing. The few divine transformation perfected lords actually did not appear. Therefore, the blood that flowed became redder, and more people died. The situation gradually began to get out of control. In Lu Chen's memory, the clearest image was that the world seemed to always be red, as if it had been smeared with blood. He remembered that he went to find perfected Lord Tianlan for the last time, but he forgot what exactly he said. The only thing he remembered was that perfected Lord Tianlan seemed to be looking at him with deep meaning, and that pair of eyes that were as deep as the sea was shining with a strange light. He finally said, "It's almost daybreak." The fur on Atsu's body was still as soft and smooth as he remembered. Its body was still leaning against Lu Chen's side, and the place within reach was still warm. This was perhaps the only thing that Lu Chen felt somewhat comforted at this moment. His mind was in a mess, as if it was in a mess. Countless images seemed to be fragmented and mixed together, making it difficult for him to distinguish them. Only the last sentence that perfected Lord Tianlan said to him in his memory, that, "It's almost daybreak," was becoming clearer and clearer in his mind, and the echo was getting louder and louder. Dawn is coming? Lu Chen lowered his head and thought for a long time. Then, he suddenly stood up, and with a cold expression, he strode to the door of the house. After taking a deep breath, he suddenly pulled hard, and the door opened with a squeak. Then, he walked out. The sky was dark red, gloomy, like a tumbling sea of blood. There was no sign of daybreak at all. At some point in time, the world had actually been completely swallowed by a sea of blood. Chapter 652. When the sky full of red light sprinkled down and shone on Lu Chen's body, he couldn't help but be dazed for a moment. At that moment, as if he had suddenly received some kind of stimulation, the black fire in the depths of his body suddenly ignited. Like a wave, it rapidly surged through the meridians in his body and washed through them. Then, the strange aura that he hadn't even noticed before had invaded his body was instantly incinerated. Lu Chen's body shook slightly and his eyes immediately regained clarity. It was also at this moment that he finally completely woke up. This night had been very long, so long that he was almost unable to wake up from his dream. It was also at this moment that those memories that were almost hidden finally began to slowly surface in his clear mind. He hadn't forgotten those things that happened a long time ago. He still remembered those things that happened recently. It was as if although he looked no different from an ordinary person before, he had lost his memories like a walking corpse. He was still that person, but not complete. The battle in Immortal City became more and more intense after the appearance of the Blood Sea, and under the circumstances that the few divine transformation perfected lords didn't come out to stop it for some reason, the situation began to go out of control day by day. The fighting between the several parties became more and more bloody and tragic, and more people died. Everyone gradually became bloodshot. At the same time, after Golden Dragon Perfected Lord took the lead to withdraw from the battle and left Immortal City, another big shot who had been silent for a long time, Perfected Lord Lu Yun also seemed to be unable to bear the pressure of the impending storm. Following Golden Dragon Perfected Lord's example, he also led his subordinates out of Immortal City, the center of the world's power. In this way, there was another delicious piece of meat. The parties in the battle swarmed forward and fought even more fiercely. Lu Chen looked up at the sky, his expression cold and somber. Although he didn't know why the power of the black fire in his body would suddenly awaken and expel that strange power at this time, the most important thing was that he had regained consciousness. And once he regained consciousness, it didn't take Lu Chen much effort to notice that there was clearly something strange about the current situation. Of course, this couldn't be a simple internal conflict in Zhengxianmeng. It was an internal conflict between the big forces represented by the divine transformation perfected lords for territory. As long as there was something wrong with their brains, they would be able to see that although this was intense, it was not in line with the actual interests of those big shots. Zhengxianmeng was a great flag that represented justice and righteousness. It represented the moral high ground of justice. Everyone stood under this great flag and said, "You are an evil demon, I will punish you on behalf of justice." Naturally, the opponent would flee in defeat. Not to mention fighting back, it would be difficult for them to even talk back. Wasn't it the best time to live such a beautiful and relaxing life where everyone ruled over the world? Other than a lunatic, who would want to completely destroy the banner of Zhengxianmeng? Crazy? Lu Chen was stunned for a moment, thinking that there really seemed to be a lunatic here. It was impossible to reason with a lunatic, even if the reason was exceptionally clear and obvious. However, a lunatic would not follow the rules, especially when that lunatic had this kind of ability. Then things would become very scary and easily get out of control. However, Lu Chen soon thought of another point that made him puzzled. Even if the damned Baldy was a lunatic and unreasonable, what about the other 3 divine transformation stage immortals? Could it be that Tai Hu, Guangbo, and Gu had also become lunatics? Madness could be contagious, Lu Chen didn't know why. But when he thought of this, he suddenly felt a little funny, and then he laughed out loud. He looked at the sky, and then at the world that was shrouded in a dark red radiance. The top of Mount Celestial Dragon was dark, with red clouds pressing down and thunder rumbling. From time to time, lightning would burst out from the distant clouds and tear the sky apart. It looked like the end of the world. However, Lu Chen did not look worried or afraid at all. He looked at everything in front of him and shook his head. He thought that if the world was destroyed, then so be it. He had never thought about the people of the world. Although he had done great deeds for the people of the world, such as destroying the devil cult, he did not know when it started, but the idea of fighting for the people of the world, which was instilled in him by the damn Baldy since he was a child, had gradually faded. Perhaps only the damn Baldy was still obsessed with it. "Atsu, let's go," Lu Chen said to Atsu, who was squatting at his feet. Atsu responded in a low voice, stood up and walked forward. Lu Chen glanced at it and found that the body of this black dog seemed to have grown bigger. He was silent for a moment, sighed and said, "It seems that you have been eating well recently." Atsu turned its head and looked at him. Its eyes were bloodshot, but its gaze was not fierce. Perhaps in this world, only Lu Chen could make it look like this. "Where should I go?" Lu Chen muttered to himself. After a moment, he smiled and said, "Forget it, let's go find the damn Baldy. This blood sea anomaly is too strange. Not only does it hurt others, it can also hurt ourselves. I have a feeling that if this goes on, I'm afraid that the people of the immortal city will go crazy. I have to tell him that he can't go on like this." Atsu did not comment and just followed him. They had woken up from this inexplicable nightmare. What they faced in front of them seemed to be a bigger and more vicious nightmare, and there was no sign of it ending and waking up. However, as he walked, Lu Chen's mind was still a little messy. Even though he had recalled everything that he should remember, even though he felt that he should have returned to being a complete person with the help of the Black Flame's power, he still felt a little confused. But that feeling of loss still surrounded him. He felt that there was still a piece missing in his heart. This feeling was very strange. He couldn't remember, but he always felt that he still remembered something, or rather, he should remember something. When countless fragments of the past found their place in his mind, the blank in his memory was like a fog, curled up in a corner, but still lingering. Occasionally, he could see bloodstains on the road in front of him. Lu Chen thought for a moment and remembered that 2 days ago, when the war entered the most chaotic and tragic stage, There seemed to be an assassination here. He looked around. It was very quiet, and there were no enemies or friends. Maybe it was because it was still early? Or because everyone was tired? Or could it be that this strange battle had suddenly ended while he was in a dream? He saw the towering and majestic temple of Kunlun from afar. He was in a trance for a moment, and then he suddenly woke up. He shook his head violently and looked up at the blood sea in the sky. His eyes were slightly cold, and then the power of the black fire in his body burned again, instantly dispersing the cold and strange aura. His mind calmed down again, but Lu Chen's heart slowly sank. Things seemed to be worse than he had imagined. He hesitated for a moment and decided to find true Lord Tianlan first. He brought Atsu into the world and walked towards the towering temple. Then he found that there seemed to be no guards outside the heavily guarded temple today. It seemed that he really didn't see a single person along the way. It seemed that he was the only person left in this world. Suddenly, he felt a hair-raising chill slowly spread out from his back. Chapter 653. What kind of feeling was that? It was probably the feeling of suddenly wondering if he was still trapped in a dream and hadn't woken up yet. What was worse was that this dream looked so realistic. For a moment, even Lu Chen himself couldn't tell whether he was awake or not. Fortunately, he had Atsu with him. This lazy but loyal black dog had never left him. When Lu Chen subconsciously reached out and stroked Atsu's back, the familiar warmth from the skin of his palm quickly calmed his somewhat throbbing heart. Lu Chen calmed himself down, walked over and hugged Atsu, and whispered, "Fortunately, you are still here." Atsu rubbed its head against Lu Chen's hand, then barked at the Kunlun temple not far ahead. Its voice was low and seemed to be a little vigilant. Lu Chen looked at the tall and majestic temple. Under the deep sea of blood and red clouds, the light and shadow intertwined and changed, like a giant standing in front of him. The doors and windows of the temple were closed, making it impossible to see the situation inside. Occasionally, there were some gaps, but it was still dark. Lu Chen didn't continue to move forward. He frowned slightly and lowered his head to think for a while. Then, he seemed to have made a decision in his heart. He said to Atsu, "Something is a little strange. Let's not go there for the time being. Let's go to other places first." After saying this, Lu Chen turned and left. He didn't look back along the way. Even his pace seemed to have become decisive, as if he had already thought it through in his heart. He had regained his previous firmness and decisiveness. Atsu followed Lu Chen and took a step forward. Suddenly, it turned back to look at the majestic Kunlun temple. A pair of blood-red eyes stared at the darkness in the red clouds. After a while, it suddenly growled, as if to demonstrate, and also as a warning. Then, it turned around and trotted, chasing after Lu Chen. After leaving the Kunlun temple, Lu Chen walked down the mountain with Atsu. Because the entire sky of the huge celestial dragon mountain was completely covered by the strange sea of blood, the mountain range was also shrouded in a dark red light. It seemed that everywhere was stained with the color of blood. There were layers upon layers of shadows, making one's hair stand on end. But this was not the first time that Lu Chen had seen such a situation. In fact, in his memory, the sea of blood that had appeared in the sky above the immortal city in the past was stronger and more serious each time. At that time, although there was still a gap in the sky that had not been submerged by the sea of blood, Mount Tianlong was basically like this now. The difference was that the phenomenon at that time did not really affect anything. There were still many people walking around Mount Tianlong. At least it looked like a normal human world. But now, there was no one. So, where did everyone go? When passing by the Fuyunji temple, which was not too far from the Kunlun temple, Lu Chen glanced in that direction. In the past, a group of elites led by Shuang were stationed here, and they had made great achievements. They defeated the devil cult, swept away the enemies, and pushed the name of Lord Tianlan's faction and Fuyunji to the peak. The entrance of the hall seemed to be empty as well. There was no one there. Lu Chen did not go near there. He just stood in the distance and stared for a while. His expression became even more solemn, and then he turned and left. The road down the mountain looked the same as before. There was no change, except that it was much more deserted. Like before, there was not a single person in sight. Even the guards that were usually seen were gone. The scenery on both sides of the road looked the same as before. Apart from being dyed with a layer of dark red light, it looked the same as before. The ancient trees were dense, and the branches spread out. Along the way, only the sound of Lu Chen's footsteps could be heard on the stone steps. As he walked, he suddenly frowned, stopped, and looked back. The black dog was following behind him. Sensing that he had stopped, it also stopped and looked up at Lu Chen. Lu Chen looked at it, rolled his eyes, and said, "You little fella, do you not make a sound when you walk now?" Atsu wagged its tail and took 2 steps forward. Sure enough, when it stepped on the stone steps of the mountain road, it did not make a sound at all. If one did not see this dog standing here with their own eyes, they might not have noticed it. It gave people the feeling that it was like a lurking and ferocious beast. Lu Chen snorted and shook his head. Just as he was about to step forward, he suddenly felt something and stopped again. He turned to look at a certain spot in the forest next to him. After a while, he suddenly strode in that direction. Atsu was a little puzzled. It looked at Lu Chen's back, not understanding what he was going to do. The moment Lu Chen walked into the forest, the light around him seemed to dim a little, as if the only source of light was blocked by his figure. The forest was very quiet, and there were branches and weeds everywhere. Lu Chen looked around and did not move. He looked like his whole body was standing there like a stone, and even the sound of his breathing was silent. After an unknown period of time, the quiet forest slowly began to change, as if something that had been suppressed by the shock had begun to unfold once again. A small, soft, and low voice was crying somewhere in the grass. If one did not come close, if one was not in this quiet place, it would be very difficult to hear. Lu Chen's eyes lit up. His gaze swept over the grass where the sound came from, and then he walked over. The sound suddenly disappeared, but Lu Chen had already reached into the grass and rummaged around a few times. After a while, he withdrew his hand from the grass, and in his palm, there was a little bird. It was a very small bird, and it looked less than half the size of a palm. Even the feathers on its body were not fully grown. Its eyes were closed, and it curled up in Lu Chen's palm. Its whole body was slightly trembling, but one could still feel the inherent warmth of life from its weak body that seemed like it could break at any time. Lu Chen looked at this small and fragile bird, and the corner of his mouth suddenly showed a trace of a smile. He stood up, held the bird, and turned to walk out of the forest. Atsu squatted on another mountain path, looking a little bored, but after seeing Lu Chen come over, especially when it saw the little bird in his hand, Atsu suddenly became excited. It barked, jumped up, and opened its mouth to bite. With a paw sound, it was Lu Chen who slapped the black dog's head to the side, and shouted, "It's not for you to eat." Atsu was a little depressed, and it growled twice, still staring at the bird. The bird's whole body was trembling violently, as if it was about to be scared to death. Lu Chen's eyes were calm, and he stared at the bird in his hand. After a moment, he said to Atsu, "Let's go, this bird is the first living thing we saw, at least." He smiled, looked into the distance, and walked forward. He said lightly, "At least it proves that we are not the only 2 alive in this world. Let's go, let's find those who are still alive." Chapter 654. Perhaps the bird was too frightened or too weak, but after it was found by Lu Chen, it almost never struggled. Even when Lu Chen put it in his arms, the bird curled up and remained motionless. However, the slightly narrow and dim environment in his arms made the bird calm down. Perhaps it was the warmth of Lu Chen's body that made the bird feel supported. At least, it didn't tremble like before. It seemed that the little bird had suffered a great shock a few days ago, but... Lu Chen silently glanced at Atsu, who was following beside him, from the corner of his eyes. This muscular and tall black dog had been guarding him from the moment he woke up. It seemed like Atsu had woken up from the nightmare that he had lost his consciousness in the past. Obviously, this black dog was also affected. Its eyes turned blood red. However, Atsu was obviously not like this bird. Its body was basically intact. It seemed that it had survived that unknown mysterious time with ease. It did not lose control of its mind and even seemed to have evolved a little. Its strength seemed to be a little stronger than in Lu Chen's memory. However, other than facing Lu Chen, there was an obvious murderous aura emanating from him whenever he looked at someone else. From a long time ago, Atsu had not been interested in this kind of ordinary bird food. It would not hunt for it at all. But just now, when Atsu saw the bird and was about to pounce on it, Lu Chen could clearly feel that if he did not stop it, Atsu would probably bite the bird to death. Not to eat its meat, but simply to bite the bird to death. A shadow flashed across Lu Chen's heart. He stretched out his hand and gently touched the head of Atsu, who was walking beside him. Atsu looked back at him with a gentle expression and whispered. However, when paired with its pair of blood-red, fierce eyes, it still made people shudder with fear. The path down the mountain was the same as usual, but today it felt much longer than usual. Perhaps it was because the surroundings were too quiet. While walking, Lu Chen's mind did not stop. Instead, he kept thinking about this strange puzzle that he had encountered. Since he woke up, apart from Atsu and the half-dead bird he had just found, he hadn't seen a single living thing on Mount Tianlong, let alone a living person. So, where did all those people go? Lu Chen could not imagine what kind of power could wipe out all the people on Mount Tianlong. It should be known that the people here were the core and elite forces of Zhengxianmeng. At the same time, they were also the most powerful people in the entire human cultivation world. Was there a force in this world that could annihilate so many powerful cultivators in one fell swoop? It definitely didn't exist in this world. At this moment, Lu Chen suddenly thought of the scene of the fallen god spell that he had seen in the barren valley many years ago. Although he had personally destroyed the god's subduing spell formation, destroyed the 1,000-year plan of the devil cult and inflicted heavy damage to the devil cult, which caused a chain reaction that caused the devil cult to suffer a great loss in the following decades and gradually weakened and perished. However, the unimaginable power that appeared in front of him that day, the grand momentum that was about to come to the world, still often appeared in his nightmares, waking him up from his dreams. Lu Chen shook his head, threw those unpleasant memories out of his mind, and then looked up at the sky. Not to mention, although the vision of the sea of blood in the sky looked very different from the vision caused by the fallen god's spell in the night of the barren valley, there were some similarities in the momentum that covered the sky and the sun. They walked on the mountain road for a long time, but there was still a time when they would finish walking. However, along the way, Lu Chen still didn't see a single person. From the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain, he didn't see a single living person. The situation could no longer be described as strange, it could even be described as terrifying. Could it be that there really was a powerful unknown force that suddenly came to this world, destroyed everything, and wiped out all the human clan? Even someone as strong as perfected Lord Tianlan couldn't resist it? But how could that explain that Lu Chen was still alive? Standing at the foot of the mountain, Lu Chen looked back at the tall and majestic Mount Tianlong. He was the only living person along the way. If one day, you were the last person left in the world, how would you feel? This kind of boring question had actually been raised a long time ago, and then many people fantasized with joking or exaggerated emotions. After all, no one believed that such a thing would happen. Lu Chen also heard of this topic, but he never took it to heart, nor did he think about it. But now, along the way, even though there was a shadow of this question looming in his mind, it was only at this moment that this question finally appeared clearly in front of him. Because when he stood at the foot of the mountain and looked around, the bustling immortal city at the foot of Mount Tianlong, with countless wide streets and layers of pavilions and houses, appeared before his eyes. It was deserted, and there was no one in sight. Where did everyone go? Why was he still alive? Facing this terrifying and huge empty city, the first feeling that Lu Chen felt was not fear, but confusion and astonishment. He still couldn't figure it out. If a disaster really happened, what was so special about him that allowed him to survive on Mount Tianlong? The sound of footsteps on the street, which was originally inconspicuous, was exceptionally clear in this place that was as silent as a dead city. Lu Chen frowned and looked around carefully as he walked. Everything seemed to be the same as before. The shops were open, and the pavilions towered, but the people were gone. The sea of blood rolled in the sky above his head, blocking all the light, making the long street look a little dim. Everything around him was dark red. There seemed to be something in the eyes of the light, staring at him from a dark corner. As Lu Chen walked, he suddenly stopped. Atsu, who was following behind him, also stopped. Lu Chen lowered his head and glanced at his bosom. The lapel there trembled slightly a few times. It was the little bird that had originally calmed down and seemed to have fallen asleep in the warmth of his embrace. For some reason, it suddenly woke up, and then its body began to tremble violently. He gently patted it with his hand, trying to appease the bird, but it was of no use at all. Lu Chen thought for a while, then slowly raised his head and looked forward. On the dark red street with a touch of demonic light, a corner in front of him suddenly lit up with spots of green light. After a while, a group of snake-like things crawled out from the corner. The sound of hissing echoed in the silent street, making one's scalp tingle. Lu Chen stared at the monsters in front of him, looking at the snakes, with 3 eyes on their heads. His pupils suddenly shrank, and then he took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "Bloodworms." Chapter 655. Hiss 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 hiss. A strange and deep sound came from the terrifying mouths of the ferocious-looking bloodworms. In the gaps between the many sharp and fine teeth, one could vaguely see a snake-like tongue rolling around. A few drops of venomous saliva dripped from the corners of their mouths. Those green eyes stared at Lu Chen as if they were not looking at a person, but a walking lump of flesh and blood food. Lu Chen's pupils constricted slightly. Of course, this was not the first time he had seen this kind of strange and terrifying creature. The last time he saw this kind of bloodworm was when he was on the Kunlun mountain. Lu Chen clearly remembered that it should be close to the night of the full moon. When he felt the strong but unexpectedly familiar power in the depths of the Kunlun mountain, he thought that all the bloodworms had disappeared after the night of the full moon. But now it seemed that he was obviously wrong. Some kind of power had reappeared in the immortal city and brought this kind of terrifying creature again. What he did not know now was whether something strange had happened in the immortal city or whether some kind of power from the Kunlun mountain had come here. The next moment, Lu Chen almost instantly remembered the time when he went to the forbidden area of the Kunlun mountain. In the dark underground world between the clouds, he had encountered an almost unimaginable black dragon that used the power of the Kunlun seal. If he didn't guess wrongly, perhaps he was the one who brought the black dragon from Kunlun mountain to the immortal city. The Kunlun seal was then handed over to perfected Lord Tianlan. Since then, Lu Chen had never seen the Kunlun seal again. Of course, he had never seen the black dragon again. Now it seemed that during this period of time, the black dragon did not hide in the dark anymore. Instead, it stood out. As for what it had done, Lu Chen still had no idea. Hiss hiss. Accompanied by a strange chirping sound, the few bloodworms seemed to be unable to resist the temptation of fresh meat. They opened their mouths and opened their eyes wide. Then, without any visible movement, these bloodworms leaped up from the ground and shot towards Lu Chen like arrows that reeked of blood. Looking at those ferocious mouths with sharp teeth in midair, if they were to land on a body of flesh and blood, it was almost unimaginable what would happen next. Lu Chen's expression was solemn as he stared at the bloodworms that were charging towards him. His expression was grave, but there was no fear in his eyes. He took a step back. At the same time, 2 balls of black flames burned in his eyes. Pooh! Like a sharp knife piercing through leather, there was even a layer of trembling ripples in the air. In the blink of an eye, the fastest bloodworm had already reached in front of Lu Chen. However, when it was 2 to 3 feet away from Lu Chen, Lu Chen suddenly stretched out his right hand. His 5 fingers formed a claw and his arm quickly appeared like a ghost, directly grabbing the body of the bloodworm. The crimson worm started to wriggle, but before it could turn around and bite the hand, a ball of black flames gushed out from the palm and engulfed the crimson worm. Zhi! A sharp and hair-raising scream was instantly heard from the ball of black flames. The bloodworm desperately twisted its body in the black flames, as if it was crazy and wanted to get rid of this terrifying nightmare. However, its body was firmly grabbed by the black flames. Then, the black flames burned mercilessly. In just a short while, the bloodworm's skin and flesh were torn open, and then it directly melted. Yes, this strange, mysterious, and terrifying bloodworm was completely melted in the black flames. Hiss hiss hiss. At this moment, the other bloodworms also rushed over at this moment. Lu Chen's face darkened, and he did not retreat anymore. He threw away the burnt bloodworm in his hand and waved his hands continuously. Instead of retreating, he advanced. The black flames burned wildly in the air, instantly swallowing several bloodworms. Ear-piercing screams were heard continuously, and it made one's scalp tingle. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the ferocious crimson bugs were burned to death by the black fire. The remaining 2 crimson bugs saw that the situation was not good, so they forced themselves to stop, turned around in mid-air, and fled frantically to the side. However, at this moment, a black shadow suddenly rushed out from the side. It was Atsu. Atsu growled in a low voice, and its blood-red eyes flickered strangely. It opened its mouth wide, and with a cry, it actually directly bit the 2 bloodworms in mid-air. Lu Chen was shocked. Just as he was about to warn Atsu to be careful, he saw that after Atsu landed on the ground, it turned around and looked at him with its mouth fiercely biting. After a short while, a stream of blood flowed out of its mouth, and the cries and squeaks of the bloodworms quickly disappeared. Black Dog, who was eating the bloodworms, looked even more terrifying with blood dripping from the corner of its mouth. Lu Chen swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. After a moment of silence, he retracted his hands, and the black flames in his palms quietly extinguished. The bloodworms fell to the ground one after another, looking like candles that had been burned by a raging fire. Lu Chen looked at Atsu, and Atsu stared back at him with blood dripping from its mouth. The long street regained its silence again. The 2 of them just stared at each other, and there was a faint atmosphere of confrontation between them. After an unknown period of time, suddenly, there was a moment when they both shifted their gazes at the same time and looked forward together. Lu Chen strode forward, with Atsu by his side. Just like they had done countless times in the past, they walked together into the unknown, inseparable, never to be separated. The little bird in his arms had quietened down, and it did not make a sound for a long time. Lu Chen reached into his arms and gently touched it. Under its soft feathers, the little bird's body was still warm, and he could still feel its heartbeat. Although it was fragile, it was still tenaciously alive. Perhaps the death of the bloodworms had calmed the little bird down, or perhaps it was because Lu Chen's warmth had finally made the little thing trust and rely on him for a long time. It began to get used to Lu Chen's aura, and it no longer struggled or moved around. Lu Chen and Atsu continued to walk in this immortal city that had suddenly become empty. In front of him, there seemed to be a fog in an unknown and mysterious future. When he was still on Mount Heavenly Dragon and walked to the outside of Kunlun Palace, the reason why he did not enter the palace was because he acutely sensed that there seemed to be an extremely terrifying power hidden in the darkness of the palace. That cold killing intent caused him to shrink back at the sight of it. That was probably an instinctive sense of vigilance that arose from his many years of being a shadow. That was not the aura of perfected Lord Tianlan, but another force. After weighing the pros and cons, Lu Chen decisively chose to leave and go down the mountain without hesitation. Indeed, as he had guessed, the immortal city and Sky Dragon Mountain were one, and the strange phenomenon on the mountain was not spared at the foot of the mountain. Things were getting stranger and stranger. Lu Chen decided to go to Horse Washing Bridge first. If he remembered correctly, there was an injured white lotus in that house. Chapter 656. Lu Chen had walked the road to the horse-washing bridge countless times. It could be said that he was very familiar with it. Even if he closed his eyes, he would probably be able to find his way there. Since he had already made up his mind, he started to walk in that direction. The empty city, the deserted streets, and the occasional gust of cold wind brought about a terrifying chill. Along the way, the blood worms that they encountered just now were like a lid being opened. After that, Lu Chen and Atsu were attacked a few more times. One of the attacks that attacked them were also blood worms. Other than that, there were all kinds of strange monsters. Lu Chen could clearly see that although these road-blocking tigers still maintained their original appearances, it was obvious that they were affected by some kind of strong external force and became more violent and ferocious. They were especially greedy for fresh blood and flesh. Almost as soon as they saw Lu Chen and Atsu, they immediately attacked. Fortunately, although these monsters were ferocious and strong, Lu Chen and Atsu had their own trump cards, so it was not too difficult to deal with them along the way. Especially Lu Chen's black fire, it was especially useful in this kind of battle. It seemed to have a natural restraining effect on these bloodthirsty monsters. However, these bloodthirsty monsters had one thing in common, and that was that their eyes were almost all blood red, similar to Atsu's eyes. In the fierce battle, there would occasionally be some bloodthirsty demon beasts that stopped in their tracks after seeing Atsu's eyes, as if they had seen their companions and were puzzled. However, Atsu would often take advantage of this opportunity to rush forward without any hesitation, or break the opponent's limbs, or bite the enemy's throat, without any mercy. Along the way, Lu Chen found that the people in this huge city had disappeared. It had become the world of these monsters. As he gradually went deeper into the immortal city, the number of bloodthirsty monsters that he encountered along the way increased. It was as if the city had been completely occupied by them. However, at least it was no longer deserted. The howls of the monsters, the splatters of blood, and even the wails of the people at the moment of life and death added a cruel liveliness to the deathly silent city. To put it simply, it seemed to be a little more lively. After killing 4 to 5 waves of monsters in a row, Lu Chen decided to be careful and avoid them. He led Atsu to hide their tracks, lurking in the dark. They even went directly to the houses on both sides of the road. They sneaked through roofs, alleys, and even broke the walls of 2 houses to move forward quietly. In this way, although they would occasionally encounter 1 or 2 monsters in the house, the number of enemies they encountered was greatly reduced. Normally, it would take about half an hour to reach the horse-washing bridge. But today, Lu Chen and Atsu walked for an hour. Then, they stepped on a tall building and saw the horse-washing bridge in the distance. There is fog on that bridge. Perhaps it was due to the illumination of the sea of blood in the sky, but the fog appeared to be a faint red, and it pervaded the entire horse-washing bridge. But what was strange was that the fog only seemed to block the bridge and the road behind it. Lu Chen stared at the bridge and the fog. His face was somewhat gloomy. He felt that the fog was somewhat familiar. It was very similar to the fog that he encountered in the immortal city's catacombs. Coincidentally, the last time he went to look for White Lotus, he also encountered this strange thing. Then, this time at the horse-washing bridge, when he went to look for White Lotus, he also encountered this dark red fog. Was it really a coincidence? Lu Chen did not believe that there were so many coincidences in this world. As a shadow, if he believed in these things, it would be very difficult for him to live long. Just as he was deep in thought, suddenly, Atsu, who had been quiet all this time, suddenly raised its head. It stared at the depths of the fog, and then let out a low roar. That roar was not loud, but it was enough to alarm Lu Chen. Lu Chen's eyes slightly flashed, and he frowned as he looked at the bridge in the fog. He saw that the originally peaceful fog suddenly had some movement, and the speed at which it circulated became a bit faster. After a moment, a shadow suddenly walked out of the fog. Because the distance was very far, and there was also the fog blocking it, Lu Chen could not clearly see the appearance of the shadow. Even the outline was very vague, and he could not even tell whether it was a person, a ghost, or a demonic beast. It was basically just a black shadow. Just as he stared at that direction with rapt attention, preparing to wait for the thing in the fog to walk out, the shadow in the fog suddenly stopped. Then, from the fog came a sharp whistling sound. The whistling sound spread in all directions, and even caused some echoes in the empty streets, adding a bit of desolation and terror. Not long after, on the streets around the horse-washing bridge, a large number of various demonic beasts and monsters suddenly appeared. They flocked from all directions, and then gathered under the horse-washing bridge. At that moment, Lucien felt as if he was watching a strange scene of a king and his subjects attending a court. All of the monsters crawled outside of the fog, and when the whistling sound stopped, 5 or 6 monster leaders walked out from the group of monsters. They were clearly stronger than the surrounding monsters, and then respectfully placed a few things at the edge of the fog, which was the side of the horse-washing bridge. The shadow in the fog faintly swayed, and the surrounding bloodthirsty monsters suddenly lowered their heads a bit, seeming to be scared to death. After a while, the fog spread out and expanded a bit, then slowly retracted again. Just as it advanced and retreated, the things on the ground all disappeared. All the bloodthirsty monsters in the surroundings, including the leaders of the demonic beasts, heaved a sigh of relief. Everyone screamed at the top of their lungs, sounding extremely ferocious and terrifying. However, after Lucien witnessed this scene from the beginning to the end, he felt that these guys did not seem to be demonstrating, but rather venting their joy. After shouting like this for a while, all of the bloodthirsty monsters turned around and left. In the blink of an eye, they scattered like birds and beasts, and the horse-washing bridge returned to its original tranquility. The fog was faint, and the shadow in the fog had already disappeared. It was unknown where it went. Lucien stared at that place for a long time, and then let out a long turbid breath. He turned his head to look at Atsu, and just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, he suddenly discovered that Atsu was already staring at him. Its pair of blood-red eyes were very strange. Lucien was startled for a moment, and then thoughtfully asked Atsu, "What do you mean?" Atsu wagged its tail, and its head nodded in the opposite direction. Lucien bitterly smiled, scratched his head, and said, "You're really straightforward, running away as soon as you say you want to." His voice was only halfway through when he suddenly stopped. Then his expression changed slightly, as if he suddenly noticed something, and he was stunned into contemplation. After a moment, Lucien slowly stopped in front of Atsu. Staring at its pair of red eyes, he softly said, "Strange, why is it that from the moment I discovered that everything here is wrong, until now, the thought of running away has never flashed through my mind? Why did I have to come here to save White Lotus, and not directly turn around and leave this immortal city? Is this what I should do?" Chapter 657. Shadow was a very special profession, but at the end of the day, all shadows were still human beings. They also had the 7 emotions and 6 desires of humans. At most, they had gone through rigorous training to be able to strictly control the various desires that they were born with. But this was only control, not erase. In this world, there was no method that could completely turn a person into an emotionless animal. Even if you turned a person into a fool, he would still be afraid, and would also be happy. This was something that could not be changed. Every shadow was a different person, each had their own different life and different characteristics, including Lucien. Only on this point, all the shadows were the same, the only difference was their ability to control their desires and emotions. Lucien had always been very good at controlling his emotions and desires, otherwise he would not have been able to lurk in the evil cult for so many years, and under the most dangerous environment in the world, he would not have been able to accomplish such great feats. But he was still a normal person. He also had times when his emotions fluctuated. When he recklessly killed Sumo, it was one of the few times when he lost control of his emotions. And because his ability to control his emotions and desires was far better than ordinary people, Lucien was far more sensitive to his own emotional fluctuations than ordinary people. He knew that he would also be afraid, and also shocked, but he would suppress all negative emotions in the shortest possible time, and restore his calm. But this time, he felt something strange and different. He found that after he woke up, although he encountered all kinds of strange and terrifying things, he seemed to be able to calmly judge from beginning to end, without any shock or fear. His emotions were calm, and could even be described as indifferent. If not for the fact that Atsu was by his side, when he saw Atsu, he would still have some ripples in his heart, but Lu Chen almost felt that he really was like a walking corpse. A walking corpse. Lu Chen silently sat down, his back leaning against the wall. This tall building that was dozens of feet away from the horse-washing bridge was deserted, without any sound. Lu Chen closed his eyes, carefully listening, and very quickly confirmed that there really was no sound around him. The only thing he could feel was his own heartbeat. Other than that, there was only silence. Lu Chen felt that at this moment he should have felt a chill or even fear, but he did not. After a moment, Lu Chen opened his eyes, and slowly turned his head to the side. Atsu was still sitting beside him, guarding him like it had done for many years. When he turned his head, Atsu even stuck out its tongue, and wagged its tail. Lu Chen stared at Atsu, and after a while, he softly said, "Atsu, I can't feel your breath." Atsu did not seem to understand Lu Chen's words, and continued to look at him quietly. His pair of strange blood-red eyes flickered, and his gaze was gentle. He still looked like the black dog from before. Lu Chen was silent, and after a moment of silent thought, he suddenly reached into his bosom and took out the little bird that was hidden in his bosom. The little bird was still curled up in his palm, its head hidden under one of its wings, and did not move for a long time. Lu Chen gently stroked the feathers of the little bird with his fingers, and then realized that the body of the little bird had become cold without him noticing. He could not feel the body temperature of the little bird, let alone its heartbeat. In his palm, it did not seem to be a stubbornly living bird, but an ice cube. Lu Chen coldly looked at the little bird in his hand, and suddenly clenched his 5 fingers, grabbing the body of the little bird, and then slowly began to tighten. The body of the little bird shook violently, and then its neck moved, and then the bird's head came out from under the wing, and it lifted up. It looked the same as when Lu Chen first saved it, except for its eyes. Its eyes were completely dyed red, as if blood was flowing, and after a while, there was even a drop of blood dripping from the edge of the little bird's eye sockets. The little bird's pair of blood-red eyes stared at Lu Chen, and then it cried out. The sound was mournful and sharp, as if it had seen a great enemy with a blood feud, as if it could not wait to eat its flesh and drink its blood. Next to Lu Chen, Atsu slowly stood up, its eyes flashing with blood-red light, and it opened its mouth with its sharp fangs, like a ferocious evil beast. Puff! Suddenly, a muffled sound interrupted all sounds, and then it stopped abruptly. A cloud of blood splattered in the air, and the little bird disappeared from Lu Chen's palm, leaving only feathers, broken limbs, and flesh fluttering in the air. There was blood slowly dripping from Lu Chen's palm. He glanced at his palm, and then turned around again, this time standing in front of Atsu. He stared at Atsu's eyes, and Atsu also looked back at him. Lu Chen stretched out his blood-stained hand and gently placed it on Atsu's head. Atsu's head and body seemed to shrink back instinctively, but it soon stopped. It just quietly looked at Lu Chen, and then it did not move. Lu Chen gently stroked the hair on Atsu's neck and head, then he leaned forward and hugged its head in his arms. "You wanted to kill this bird, why?" Lu Chen asked in a very soft voice. Of course, Atsu could not speak, and its head was held in Lu Chen's arms, so it could not move, so it just wagged its tail. Lu Chen became silent. His hand did not stop stroking Atsu. His face was stuck on Atsu's fur, and he could no longer feel warmth. Finally, it also felt cold. But he still saw Atsu wagging its tail at him. In his embrace, Atsu's head rubbed against him out of habit, just like before. These were all engraved in their memories, the secrets that only belonged to him and Atsu, and no one could take them away. Except for death. "I think this should still be a dream," Lu Chen said in a low voice. "Atsu, we have to go out, right?" Atsu responded in a low voice. Lu Chen closed his eyes as he held Atsu in his arms. The hand that had been caressing Atsu suddenly stopped. It was the blood-stained hand that had come to rest on Atsu's neck. The surroundings suddenly became silent. A moment later, a sharp and shrill roar that seemed to be filled with rage suddenly rang out from inside and outside the long street in the distance. The roar came from all directions like a raging wave. The walls around the house began to creak, and dust and gravel began to fall. From the corners and cracks, a dark red mist suddenly rushed in, like a demon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, pouncing on Lu Chen. Lu Chen did not raise his head, and he did not even glance at the horrifying phenomenon around him with the corner of his eyes. He just hugged Atsu tightly, and his eyes were fixed on Atsu's body. For a moment, he held his breath. He gritted his teeth. There was no medicine for regret in this world. If he did something wrong, what should he do? He had made a mistake, right? He closed his eyes, and his mind suddenly went blank. However, he suddenly clenched his hand, and a moment later, a ball of black fire suddenly surged out. Then, with the ball of black fire in his palm, he directly destroyed the skin and flesh of Atsu, and broke the black dog's neck. Atsu roared in pain and struggled desperately, but its body was tightly held by Lu Chen, and it could not move. It could only watch in despair as the black fire completely swallowed it. In the next moment, their surroundings darkened. It was as if the raging tide of fog had completely swallowed Lu Chen and Atsu. Chapter 658. It was as if it was winter, very, very cold, or perhaps he had come to the legendary great ice fields of the north where every drop of water would freeze. Even the blood in his body felt like it was about to freeze. There was only darkness in front of him. He could not feel any light, no matter how hard Lu Chen tried to open his eyes. Compared to the emptiness in front of him, his ears seemed abnormally chaotic and noisy. From time to time, many strange sounds rang out one after another. Sometimes it was a low wail, and sometimes it was like a stormy sea, giving off a deafening sound. Sometimes it was the roar of a giant beast, and sometimes it was the roar of 1,000 ghosts. It was as if he had fallen into the underworld, into the boundless hell, and what awaited him was the painful fate of never being able to reincarnate. A trace of fear welled up in Lu Chen's heart. The unknown fate always made people like this, but he immediately reacted. He felt that his emotional reaction had finally returned to normal. This was the first time he felt happy for his fear. Following that, it seemed that the pain that the strange situation around him was exerting on him was rapidly weakening. The chill slowly faded. Lu Chen suddenly felt his body become light, and then his entire body seemed to be floating. The sounds around him disappeared, and the world suddenly became quiet. Then, in the darkness in front of him, there seemed to be a faint flicker of light in an extremely distant place. Lu Chen looked into the distance and felt that it was like a beam of starlight, faintly flickering in the deepest part of the night sky for millions of years. Then, in front of him, in this boundless darkness, like a silent and dark night sky, specks of starlight gradually lit up. They lit up the starry sky, emitting an ancient light. The starlight was clear and resplendent, like the most magnificent feast in the world unfolding in front of him. Lu Chen held his breath. At this moment, he had an urge to shout, but all the sounds were suppressed in his throat. He could only feel that he had lost control of his body, and just like that, he was floating casually and quietly in this void filled with starlight. Lu Chen stared at the sky full of stars and suddenly understood something. It was as if some kind of power had activated the lock that had been sealed in his heart for many years. Then, it quietly wiped away the dust and released the sealed past. Suddenly, his pupils dilated, and his eyes reflected the dazzling starlight in the sky, and an enormous shadow descended from the sky. It was an unimaginably huge tree, a tree that was constantly growing, sprouting, and spreading countless branches into the void. The huge tree stretched across the great and vast starry sky, many of its branches inserted into the gaps between the stars and darkness. In some places, Lu Chen even saw those strange branches reverberating with familiar dark flames. Then, they pierced through the void, creating waves of ripples that reflected fragments of a strange world, and then pierced into that world. But before he had time to think about it, or even before he had time to be shocked by this huge tree, he found that he did not feel the slightest fear or dread in the face of such a terrifying divine tree. He almost thought that there was something wrong with his emotions again, that he had returned to that strange and terrifying nightmare. But very soon, he found that this was not the case. He was not afraid, nor was his emotions cold and unresponsive. On the contrary, he felt a sense of familiarity with this huge tree in the void. It was a familiar feeling of warmth, as if he had met an old acquaintance that he had not seen for many years. As if responding to his strange feelings, the huge tree in the starry sky suddenly split off a branch, passing through countless stars and the void. In the blink of an eye, it passed through the darkness and stretched out in front of him. There were green leaves and buds on the branch, full of vitality. Even the darkness and the void could not stop this vitality, and it seemed to reflect a layer of green in Lu Chen's eyes. Lu Chen was deep in thought, looked down at his chest and found a ray of light emitting from his heart. The light was flickering, warm and peaceful, and it happened to be of the same origin as the branch of the divine tree in front of him. At that moment, Lu Chen's mind suddenly became clear. He did not know how the scene before him had happened, but he knew that all of this must have been caused by the seed of the tree of God in his body. It had resonated with the tree of God in the distant starry sky, which was why everything before him had happened. It turned out that the divine tree in the legend of the evil faction really existed, and from the magical scene in front of him, it was even greater and more magical than the legend that the evil faction worshipped and believed in. In front of Lu Chen, the branch trembled, looking a little hesitant and puzzled, probably did not understand why the seed did not leave Lu Chen's body, but was always hidden in his body. The branch slowly stretched out and gradually wrapped around Lu Chen's body. Lu Chen could do nothing about it. He had a hunch in his heart that if the branch of the divine tree exerted force, he would be smashed to pieces at any time. But he did not feel afraid, because the light in his heart was still bright, and the seed seemed to be firmly expressing its attitude. After an unknown period of time, the branch seemed to have finally accepted reality. It gently patted Lu Chen's body a few times, as if it was reluctant to part, but finally decided to leave. The branch slowly loosened from Lu Chen's body, but before it left, this vigorous branch full of indescribable life aura, suddenly shone brightly. A strong and abundant spiritual power suddenly poured into Lu Chen's body, like a flood rushing through Lu Chen's meridians, and then converged into the most secret place in his heart, where the seed was. The light emitted by the seed instantly became several times brighter. Then, the light flickered, and continuously flickered several times, as if it was thanking the branch. The branch that came from the void slowly left Lu Chen's body, and then shrank back, returning to the eternal silence and starry night sky. The light in Lu Chen's eyes and the incomparably huge shadow of the divine tree gradually disappeared into the darkness. It was as if this miraculous scene had never happened. If it wasn't for the fact that his body was still filled with powerful life force, if it wasn't for the fact that the seed in his heart was still shining brightly. The next moment, suddenly, the world was silent, and there was only darkness in front of him. All the starlight disappeared, and all the sounds became silent. He fell from the void, as if he had fallen into a bottomless abyss, but in the end, he only felt his body suddenly shake, and a familiar feeling surged in his heart. That was the familiar bed he slept on last night, right? Before he could open his eyes, he suddenly heard the sound of a dog barking. Then, there was a familiar voice, with some impatience, shouting not far from him, "Hey, it's daybreak." Chapter 659. Lu Chen felt a slight pain in his heart. This was a reaction that he had never experienced before, no matter what kind of nightmare he had fallen into. The next moment, even before he opened his eyes, the last scene of the dream flashed across Lu Chen's mind. The scene of his heart glowing. Lu Chen let out a low groan and suddenly sat up. Then, he subconsciously covered his chest where his heart was. The light shone down, and everything around him gradually began to become clear and bright. The familiar household utensils came into his eyes one by one, letting him know that he was still in his own room. His hand was covering his chest, but it was separated by a layer of clothes. It was calm and ordinary, without any abnormalities. Of course, it was impossible for anything like a halo to be emitted from his body. The pain in his heart was rapidly weakening and disappearing, making Lu Chen have an illusion that maybe he really just had a long nightmare. He turned his head and saw that next to his bed, Atsu was lying on the ground. It looked lazy and didn't move for a long time. Lu Chen's heart suddenly skipped a beat. He didn't know why he felt a little nervous. He jumped off the bed and squatted beside Atsu. When he stretched out his hand to stroke Atsu's head, his palm actually trembled slightly in a very secretive manner. Atsu's fur was soft and smooth, and its body temperature came from his palm. Lu Chen silently touched its head. After a while, Atsu seemed to feel something and raised its head to look at Lu Chen. At that moment, Lu Chen held his breath and stared at Atsu, especially at its eyes. Atsu's eyes were as black and white as usual. Lu Chen was startled, then he took a deep breath and let it out. Then he smiled and gave Atsu a deep hug, holding it in his arms. Atsu looked a little confused about Lu Chen's action, but it could still feel Lu Chen's feelings, so it gently rubbed its head against his chest like before. Lu Chen smiled and patted Atsu's head, sweeping away the gloomy mood not long ago. Then he quickly remembered that when he was about to wake up, other than the sound of Atsu, he seemed to have heard someone nearby murmuring something like, "It's dawn." Lu Chen glanced around. This was his bedroom. There was no one else in the house except him and Atsu. Lu Chen thought about it and felt that the sound was coming from the direction of the door, so he stood up and walked quickly to the door. When his hand touched the door latch, he paused slightly and wondered what the outside world would look like when he opened the door this time. Would it really turn into an empty world just like that long-lasting but realistic nightmare? After a moment, he pulled the door latch, opened the door, and walked out. The world was still the same world, at least it was still the world he was familiar with. There was still the blood sea anomaly in the sky, but it was different from the nightmare. Although this blood sea anomaly had advanced a lot compared to before, it was still a long way from completely engulfing the sky above the entire immortal city. There was still a large circular sky in the sky, it was blue, and the sunlight shone down from there, making people feel that it was a beautiful morning. There were faint sounds of people and footsteps in the distance, and there were birds singing and the fragrance of flowers drifting in the wind outside the wall. Except for the fact that there was no one in the courtyard, it seemed to be a rare good day. Did he hear it wrong? Or did that person leave first? Lu Chen pondered for a while. When he first woke up, because what he saw and heard in the dream was too shocking, it shocked him so much that he even lost his mind for a period of time. Although he heard the voice when he woke up, he could not tell who it was for a while. However, there were not many people in Fuyunji who could come to his courtyard. No matter how he looked at it, it was nothing more than Supreme Tianlan, Shuang, and a few other high-ranking people in Fuyunji. Well, there was also the original old Ma. If he did not hear it wrong, then it could only mean that the person had left. Could it be that the damn Baldy suddenly came over on a whim, found out that he had slept a little late, and then complained? Lu Chen pursed his lips. Although the damn Baldy was crazy, he should not have done such a senseless thing, right? But was it really not him? Lu Chen thought carefully again and found that he did not dare to completely rule out this possibility. Everything in this world was good. Shadows could deal with anything, but it was really confusing to meet a crazy person. Lu Chen shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He returned to his room, closed the door, and sat back down on the edge of the bed. He placed one hand on his heart and suddenly looked at Atu, who was sitting next to him, as if deep in thought. Atu's reaction was extremely fast, he had already jumped up in an instant. Contrary to his previous lazy appearance, he jogged over to Lu Chen's side. He even put his feet on top of Lu Chen's and stuck out his tongue as he called out in a low voice. He had an expression that said, take me, let's go play together." Lu Chen laughed. For some reason, when he looked at Atsu now, his heart always softened a little. He reached out his hand and put it around Atsu's neck, then held it in his arms. Then, Lu Chen took a deep breath and snorted. Suddenly, a faint light flashed. In the blink of an eye, there seemed to be a gust of wind in the room. Then, both Lu Chen and Atsu disappeared. After the familiar feeling of weightlessness and the feeling of dizziness, Lu Chen and Atsu once again came to the mysterious ancient tree hole. The atmosphere here was the same as before, but when Lu Chen stood still and looked around, he suddenly frowned. He found that there seemed to be something different here. Because he was busy on Mount Tianlong, and there were all kinds of eyes and ears, Lu Chen had not come here for a long time in order to hide the secret that he had the seed of the sacred tree in his body. After all, this secret was no small matter. If it was known by others, the consequences would be unpredictable. If it weren't for this strange dream that was full of strangeness, Lu Chen had to come in to check it out. He was afraid that he would not come in for a long time. But with one look, he could see that there was something different about it. In fact, to be precise, this tree hole had undergone great changes. First, the area of the tree hole had directly doubled. Second, the puddle in the center of the tree hole, although the area did not expand, the puddle of clear water was now filled with the green liquid that was overflowing with spiritual power. On the surrounding walls of the tree hole, there was still green gas entwined in the dragon branches, and it looked thicker and thicker. But all these changes were not as good as the last thing that Lu Chen was staring at it now. One of the two doors that were once hidden suddenly revealed itself on the wall deep in the tree hole, as if it could be opened by walking over. Chapter 660. This ancient and mysterious tree hole had undergone a huge change during the previous incident. The most obvious change was the addition of two doors on the tree wall. Lu Chen was not blind. Of course, he would not turn a blind eye to this. He had long thought of ways to carefully investigate it, but there had been no results. In fact, since ancient times, the door was not complicated. Most of the time, it was nothing more than an entrance to a passage that connected the inside and outside. In other words, if there was a door in the wall that could be opened, would the door lead to somewhere else? Lu Chen did not know the answer, but he was very curious about it. He had carefully checked almost every place in this tree hole, especially the tree wall near the two doors. However, the two doors were sealed by the power of the 5 elements. The tree wall blocked them, and green chi surrounded them. No matter how he tried, the two doors could not be opened. To be precise, he could not find a place to open the door. After the two doors appeared, they were more of a kind of outline on the tree wall. Although it was very clear that they were in the shape of doors, most of them were still one with the tree wall. Wanting to open the door was equivalent to breaking the tree wall, which was very difficult to do. But now, in this ancient tree hole that had undergone another huge change, apart from the expansion of the territory and the revival of the immortal water, one of the two hidden doors in the tree wall had completely revealed itself. The door gap had a clear outline, and there was even a round bulge the size of a fist in the middle, which was just right for a person to grasp with their palm. Anyone who saw this door would know that it could be opened. But the problem was, what was behind the door after it was opened? This place itself was the seed of the divine tree. In the real world, the seed was only the size of a finger, but there was such a strange small world hidden inside, which showed how magical it was. Similarly, the door that could appear inside the seed of the divine tree, where would it lead to after it was opened? It was not very likely to be a very casual and ordinary answer. Was it a blessed grotto heaven filled with immortal chi, or was it a mysterious and unfathomable arcane realm? Perhaps it was a magical place with mountains of gold and seas of silver, or an immortal paradise with treasures everywhere. These were all beautiful conjectures, but could there be another possibility? Could there actually be something bad behind the door? Could it be a terrifying world? Once it was opened, some kind of unpredictable power would appear. At the very least, people would not be able to resist it under such circumstances. Simply put, after opening the door, would something happen? Would someone die? Lu Chen did not dare to rule out this possibility. He stared at the door, hesitating whether to open it or not. This kind of hesitation towards the unknown felt a little familiar. Lu Chen pondered for a while and recalled that a few years ago, he and Atsu were forced to fall into the extremely dangerous Longchuan in the depths of the dangerous Lost Land and hid here at the critical moment. Since then, when he and Atsu had used up all the food in the cave and had to take the risk to go out, his mood at that time was similar to what he was feeling now. No one knew what fate awaited them after they left this place. Would it be life or death, or something even more terrifying? But things were different now. At that time, Lu Chen and Atsu had nowhere to go and had no choice. But now, he actually did not have to open the door. He could pretend that he saw nothing and leave with Atsu. He could even never enter this ancient tree hole again and live his own life in the real world outside. Everything was within his expectations, but opening the door was not. Lu Chen stood in front of the door and hesitated for a long time. In the middle of it, he went up to examine the door carefully. Apart from discovering that the door seemed to have grown naturally on the tree wall and was made of the same material as the surrounding tree walls, he did not find anything else. The door was tightly shut. If he did not open it, he would not be able to see anything behind the door. Should he open the door or not? In other words, should he take the risk and see what was behind the door? Lu Chen still could not make up his mind. In fact, if this door was in his original Central Plains world, even if there was a great possibility of danger behind the door, he would still try to open it. But now, the most important thing was that this was actually the inside of the sacred tree seed. Who would believe that such a small seed could actually hide such a small world within its body? This was completely contrary to the understanding of everyone in the world. If it wasn't for the fact that it was right before his eyes, even Lu Chen himself wouldn't believe it. It was precisely because he knew that this thing was too strange and peculiar that Lu Chen regarded it as his greatest and deepest secret and had not revealed it to anyone for many years. By the same logic, if the inside of the sacred tree was so strange, who could guarantee that no accidents would happen after he opened the door? Lu Chen even had the feeling that after he opened the door, a huge wave of water would rush in and swallow this place. This inexplicable premonition of danger was, of course, influenced by his extremely unpleasant experience in the Dragon River, but this possibility could not be completely ruled out. It was just that, everyone had their own curiosity. At some point, Lu Chen's hand was already on the handle of the door. It felt rough, but also had a hint of the unique softness of plants. He pondered for a moment, then suddenly looked back. Atsu was standing beside him, looking just as puzzled. Lu Chen thought for a moment, then beckoned to Atsu and whispered, "Can you sense what's behind the door?" There were many mysteries about this black dog, especially after it evolved into a sacred beast. There were many times when Atsu's senses were more sensitive and mysterious than Lu Chen's own. This could be considered as Lu Chen's random question as a last resort. After being asked by Lu Chen, Atsu did not immediately shake its head. Instead, it glanced at the door, then slowly walked over. First, it carefully sniffed around the door for a while, then it went all the way up to the middle of the door. It seemed that it was a little interested in the protruding handle on the door, and it looked at it for a while. Lu Chen frowned and said, "Is there something wrong with this thing?" Atsu barked, then suddenly tilted its head and opened its mouth to bite the thing. Lu Chen was shocked. Just as he was about to stop it, he saw that Atsu's eyes were bright and full of curiosity. It really was like a human. Then, he saw Atsu tilt its head, and actually shook the thing and turned it half a circle. "Paw!" A soft sound came from somewhere on the door. It was faint and deep, as if it had slept for thousands of years and had finally woken up. It was strenuously and tiredly opening its eyes to look at the world. There was a sound coming from the door. Rustle, 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 rustle. He didn't know what it was, but it seemed to be coming from behind the door. It was as if something was knocking on the door, urging and knocking, impatiently wanting to open the door and enter from the outside world. The door was opened a little, and a touch of deep darkness gently spilled in from behind the door. Chapter 661. In fact, it was difficult to describe darkness with words like sprinkling. In the minds of all living beings in the world, darkness was the opposite of light. Darkness was invisible, and darkness was always outside of light. Light could be sprinkled, and it was something that our eyes could see. Sunlight, moonlight, starlight, or other kinds of light, such as the light of candlelight, the light of swords, the faint light of the sky, as long as it was light, we could see it. Every time we saw light sprinkling down in the darkness, every time the night passed and morning came, and the first light of dawn appeared, we would always feel touched. But darkness was different. No one had ever seen it sprinkling down. Everyone knew that when there was light, darkness would retreat, it would avoid, and it would hide outside of the light. At least before today, in Lu Chen's memory, this was what he thought. He had never even thought about why it was like this, and he had never thought about whether there was any reason behind it. Light and darkness were natural existences in the world. From birth to death, they were never absent. They quietly and intimately accompanied everyone's life. This was a matter of course, a matter of course. So why did he question it? Wasn't it natural for darkness to avoid light? Until now. Lu Chen looked at the crack in the door in front of him. Slowly, his eyes widened. He didn't see anything terrifying. He only saw a beam of darkness coming in from behind the door, from the crack in the door. Then the darkness seemed to become a beam of light, just like the impression he had of light in his memory. Like a beam of light, it shone in. There was originally some light in this ancient tree hole, but it seemed a bit timid and avoided this door. The darkness swept through the air and gently sprinkled on the ground, leaving a shadow in front of Lu Chen, right beside his feet. The black dog's mouth was still biting on the handle of the tree door, but it seemed to have realized that there might be something strange behind the door. It did not release its mouth, but it raised its head and glanced at Lu Chen. Lu Chen's eyes were completely fixed on the strange darkness. He was shocked that this darkness could actually repel the light. It completely overturned the impression in his mind, and for a moment, he did not notice Atsu. Atsu glanced at the dark shadow not far away and felt that it was indeed a little strange. However, it seemed that it was just strange. At least, Atsu did not sense any dangerous aura from it. The dark light penetrated in. It was dark and strange, but it did not split the ground, nor did it shake the mountains. There was no collapse of heaven and earth. Everything in the tree hole was normal. It was so quiet as if nothing had happened. He seemed to be fine. Even Lu Chen seemed to be in a daze, without any reaction. Atsu tilted its head and thought carefully for a while. It glanced at the mysterious and strange darkness behind the door. It was the curiosity of a passionate, fearless black dog that was very interested in the unknown world. It grunted, as if it was complaining, but also as if it was cheering itself up. Then, it stomped its feet and shook its head. Lu Chen immediately sensed that something was amiss. He immediately reacted and blurted out, "Wait," before his voice trailed off. The agile black dog had already opened the strange and unpredictable door. The door did not make any sound, such as the creaking sound of years of disrepair, or the rumbling sound of heavy friction. It just quietly opened with Atsu's movements. Then, as if an omnipresent god in the unseen world suddenly woke up and looked over from a distant place, an endless darkness suddenly poured down from the boundless void like a tidal wave. After a soundless thunderclap that seemed to roar in one's mind, the darkness surged in from behind the door like a tidal wave. It swallowed everything. There was the sound of breathing in the darkness. It was heavy and urgent. Standing in the surging darkness, one's first feeling was that one had completely lost control of their body. Their vision suddenly turned black, and then the whole world suddenly collapsed, as if they had fallen into a bottomless abyss. All the tragedies that could happen in the world, all the most terrifying things that one could imagine in one's mind, under the stimulation of the darkness, instantly rushed into one's mind. His heart was stuffy and his head hurt. At that moment, he felt like he was about to explode. Lu Chen even felt that there was a very important string in his head. It was suddenly stretched to the extreme, and it felt like it was about to snap. Of course, it was an indescribable illusion. In his complicated and dangerous past, in some unbearable days, he had even seen with his own eyes what was inside human skulls. He had seen with his own eyes the miserable state of human skulls being split open. He knew that there was no such string in a human's head, but for some reason, Lu Chen clearly felt that if this string really snapped in his senses, then he would definitely be finished. Perhaps he wouldn't die, but Lu Chen felt that what awaited him would be a fate more terrifying than death. This string cannot be broken. He immediately reacted. In the darkness, in a situation where he couldn't see anything, when he couldn't even completely control his own body, he let out a light snort. In an instant, a dark flame ignited in his body. With an unprecedented wild speed, he didn't even care about the damage to his meridians. Almost in an instant, he was pushed to the maximum extent that he could control, and then it spread throughout his body. With a bang, the black flame shot out from every inch of Lu Chen's skin. In the darkness, Lu Chen became a burning man. His clothes were instantly burned to ashes, and everything returned to his most primitive state. The black flame was like an evil dragon, using his body as fuel, burning wildly. But at the same time, the black flame also separated his body from the sudden darkness around him, forming a wall of black flame outside his body. Phew! A deep and distant breathing sound came from the depths of the black flame. Lu Chen felt his own body bit by bit, feeling that he was once again a person. Even the taut and invisible string in his mind, under the burning of the black flame, gradually relaxed, retreating from the edge of collapse. All of this happened in the blink of an eye, but to Lu Chen, it felt like an extremely long time had passed. He breathed a sigh of relief, and subconsciously opened his eyes to look around. He only saw darkness, endless darkness. Even the tree hole he was originally in had disappeared. Suddenly, as if he had sensed something, he suddenly raised his head, and then he was stunned. Above his head, in the depths of the darkness, suddenly appeared a huge eye. It was countless times larger than his body, as if a huge eye that covered the entire sky was staring at him. Lu Chen held his breath. At that moment, the memories in his mind were boiling. Suddenly, he felt that it was a little familiar, as if he had seen this eye somewhere before. Chapter 662. This strange eye that suddenly appeared in this strange and mysterious boundless darkness was, of course, completely different from the eyes of ordinary people. There was no white in that eye. It was more like a burning sea of fire. Instead, there was a deep darkness in the center, which somewhat resembled the pupil of a human eye. In the deepest part of the darkness, there was a strange light flowing and flickering. The flickering light was like a galaxy of stars. In the depths of the pupil, there seemed to be another strange world. This eye was extremely huge, it seemed to occupy most of the dark sky in Lu Chen's sight. At this moment, the only thought in Lu Chen's mind was probably the word God in shock. Yes, other than the word God passed down from ancient legends, what else could be used to describe this incredible thing? It was obviously a powerful existence that far surpassed ordinary people, or perhaps everything in front of him was just an imagination or illusion in Lu Chen's mind? Lu Chen was taught by the world's most powerful person, Supreme Tianlan, and had been lurking in the devil cult for many years. He had seen countless unimaginable strange things. Of course, he knew that there were indeed some very strange methods in this world that could make people have illusions and fantasies in their own minds. In other words, it was directly deceiving people's brain and reason, and thus could do countless seemingly unimaginable things. When he was on Kunlun Mountain, in order to avenge the tortured Atsu, Lu Chen once used a similar method on a person called He Changsheng. At that time, he only used a very superficial method to seal off this person's vision, and then used the misunderstanding of hearing and touch to directly cause great torture and finally scared that person to death. And this was just a simple method to seal off one kind of perception. According to Lu Chen's own knowledge, in some strange schools and ancient inheritance, there was a powerful Taoist method to seal off many kinds of perception. Of course, for so many years, this kind of method actually did not appear too many times in the human world. As for the reasons, firstly, it was said that this method was too difficult to cultivate unless one was a genius. Secondly, this kind of Tao art was too heaven-defying. If one really fell for it, even perfected cultivators of the soul formation stage would be at a disadvantage. A method that could threaten a soul formation perfected monarch would not end well if one did not have a strong ability to protect oneself. Therefore, such a method had gradually become a legend over the years. If it was not for Lu Chen's rich experience, he would not have known about these things. Therefore, it was at this moment that Lu Chen immediately became vigilant when the thought of God popped up in his mind. The scene before his eyes was so inconceivable and unheard of. It was practically impossible for something like this to happen in the mortal world. Could it be that he had suddenly fallen into a trap at some point in time? He stared at the eye, and the huge eye in the darkness stared back at him. There was no earth-shattering event, no heaven falling and earth splitting, no lightning flashing and thunder rumbling, not even wind, rain, thunder and lightning. Everything was so quiet and unexpected. The giant eye looked at Lu Chen. Perhaps it was because it was too huge, or perhaps it was because he could not truly understand that kind of existence, but Lu Chen felt that he could not see any expression of emotion from the eye. However, after looking at it for a while, his heart suddenly trembled. He realized why he suddenly felt that the giant eye looked a little familiar. He seemed, really, to have seen this eye somewhere before. Yes, he had seen it before. Many, many years ago, in the deepest part of the memory that he had always wanted to forget, in that ancient and desolate valley. The three elders of the devil cult and the fire shaman of the brute tribe ignited the flames and activated the ancient god-subduing spell formation. With the help of the spiritual power of the mysterious seed of the tree of God, they opened a passage to the sky, tore apart the curtain of night, and then attracted the god they wanted. Lu Chen clearly remembered that night, when he stood behind Yun Shouyang and looked up, he saw a strange huge eye in the crack in the sky. But he did not know if too much time had passed, causing his memory to become a little chaotic. Lu Chen vaguely remembered the scene he saw in that desolate valley. He saw that the strange eye in the sky seemed to have a distinct emotion. That eye was angry, arrogant, bloodthirsty, and looked down on all living things with indifference. It was indifference from being high above, just like when we walk, we do not care about the struggling or passing ants at our feet. They called it God. They wanted to pull this God into this world. They wanted to use the power of this God to become more powerful, to reach or even surpass the level of deity transformation stage that they dreamed of. They had almost succeeded. If there was no Lu Chen. Is that you? Lu Chen suddenly opened his mouth and shouted, "Are you the god that appeared in that desolate valley?" Strangely, there was not much fear in his voice. Other than a little curiosity, he seemed to have quickly calmed down. In the face of this incomparably terrifying existence, his voice did not even tremble. The huge eye stared at him without any reaction, and of course did not give him any answer. The dark flame was still burning on the surface of Lu Chen's body, silent but blazing. In the black flame, Lu Chen suddenly smiled, nodded and said, "You are fake." Boom! Suddenly, in the boundless darkness at the end of the sky, there was a sudden clap of thunder. A bolt of lightning flashed like a silver snake, tearing a bright wound in the darkness. Lu Chen closed his eyes and did not speak. The black flame began to slowly return to his body, and his body began to spin in the darkness, faster and faster. All of a sudden, he seemed to have suddenly turned into a shooting star, rushing into the depths of the dark sky. The next moment, when he opened his eyes again, there was suddenly light in front of him. It was a soft light, a warm light from the tree hole. He was still standing in the tree hole, still standing in front of the door, but the difference was that the door was now closed, and one of his hands was on the doorknob, holding it tightly and pushing the door closed. Atsu looked like a dead dog, half of its tongue was crooked outside its mouth, and its eyes were bewildered as it fell to the ground. From time to time, it would let out a low growl, as if it was having a nightmare. Lu Chen looked at Atsu, then looked at the closed door, and a trace of fear suddenly flashed across his face. Until now, he still had not figured out what was behind the door, but he knew that this door was the most dangerous place he had ever encountered in his life. In the dream just now, if he had hesitated for even a moment, he might have sunk into that darkness forever. Then the fate that awaited him might be to never be reincarnated. He bent over and picked up Atsu, carefully examining him. He felt that after the door was closed, Atsu's emotions were quickly calming down, and it seemed that waking up from the nightmare was a very quick thing. He breathed a sigh of relief, and after a moment's thought, he took Atsu a few steps away from the door. At the same time, his heart suddenly moved, and his eyes looked to the other side of the tree hole. There was another door, still hidden in the depths of the tree wall, not showing itself. That door, where did it lead to? What kind of existence was behind that door? Chapter 663. Standing in the ancient tree hole that had changed drastically, Luchan felt a chill in his heart as he recalled the strange scene that he had experienced before, even though he had always been calm and collected. At the same time, he was also on guard. Ever since the Battle of the Barren Valley, the seed of the Tree of God had fused with him. They had been together for more than 10 years, and he had almost completely regarded it as a part of his body. He went in and out of the tree hole as if he was going in and out of his own home. Everything seemed so natural. Other than keeping this secret from outsiders, Lu Chen was no longer wary of this seed. Come to think of it, it was the divine water in this tree hole that had saved him from the desperate situation of being burned by the black fire. Without this place, he would not have lived until now. All these years, this tree hole had always quietly but firmly acted as a solid shield for him, and had even saved his life several times. Lu Chen had always regarded this place as his last safe place. Before today, it could be said that he had no doubts about it. However, the door that suddenly appeared and opened in front of him today clearly told him that this mysterious place, this seed of strange origin, still had many secrets that he did not know. In that case, this place was a secret that only he knew of. Was it an absolutely safe place? Lu Chen looked a little gloomy. He glanced at the door that had been tightly shut, but he did not speak for a long time. It was very quiet in the tree hole. After a while, Atsu seemed to have returned to normal, and it got up from the ground. It was unknown if this black dog had experienced a nightmare just now, but it seemed to have a strong resistance to that kind of dream. Other than the slight discomfort that it showed at the beginning, it quickly shook its body and wagged its tail, and seemed to be fine. Lu Chen glanced at Atsu, and his heart calmed down. After hesitating for a while, he walked away from the mysterious door, walked to the center of the tree hole, and sat down. The area here was twice as large as before, but the puddle of water in the center of the tree hole didn't change much. It seemed smaller than before. However, at this moment, the clear and colorless water in the pool had completely changed. It had once again become the immortal water that Lu Chen had seen when he first entered this place, which was filled with abundant vitality. It was a strange yet somewhat familiar feeling. Lu Chen sat at the edge of the pool and saw his reflection reflected in the green water. He couldn't help but smile. Memories of the past surged in his mind. He remembered many times when he was burned by the black fire and fell into the water here. For a moment, he even had the urge to jump into the pool. However, just at this moment, when the corner of his eyes swept over a certain corner of the pool, he was suddenly startled and his eyes narrowed. The depths of the water rippled slightly. A black shadow flashed through the ripples and swayed gently. It was a familiar feeling. Almost at the same time he looked over, a black fire burned in the depths of his eyes. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, leaned forward, and stared at the bottom of the water ripples. When his eyes passed through the green immortal water and the crystal clear dew that floated to the surface from time to time, he saw that at the bottom of the pool, a strange plant had grown. The green leaves were slender, and that mysterious and strange black fire, as if it was a companion of this plant, appeared from time to time on these leaves. The black fire burned on the green leaves, but it did not burn or damage the plant in the slightest. To be exact, the black fire was emitted from the inside of the plant, sometimes bright and sometimes dark, flickering. When Lu Chen saw this strange scene, he immediately thought of himself. Similarly, black fire was in his body, and it seemed like it could coexist with him. It would never harm his physical body, but it could cause fatal and terrifying damage to others. What kind of logic was this? Until now, Lu Chen had not figured it out, but after thinking about it carefully, he quickly remembered that the spirit grass under the pool did not appear out of thin air. In fact, he himself had brought these spirit grass here. When he was still on the Kunlun mountain, Atsu acted as a thief for stealing spirit grass everywhere for a period of time. It stole many precious spirit grass from the herb garden of the Kunlun party. Regarding this lack of public morality and taking advantage of the chaos to enrich their own pockets, Lu Chen severely criticized Atsu and taught it to never do this kind of stealing again. Then, he stored all the valuable spirit grass that Atsu had stolen into the tree hole. Among them, there was a kind of spirit grass called black mud lotus that could only grow in water and mud. Even after it was picked, if it was not immediately refined into medicine, then it must be kept in water. Otherwise, its spiritual energy would dissipate in a short period of time, and it would become useless. At that time, Lu Chen casually threw those black mud lotus into this already useless pool. After that incident, Kunlun Mountain became turbulent, and he continuously encountered many dangerous situations. Unknowingly, he had long forgotten about this experience. But now, at the bottom of this pool, the spirit grass that seemed to have merged with the strange black fire should be the black mud lotus that he had thrown into the water. Lu Chen never knew that in this world, there was actually a spirit grass that could merge with such a strange thing like the black fire. But thinking about it carefully, before him, besides the fire's shaman and himself, there seemed to be no third person who could have this kind of power. Maybe there is one more. Lu Chen turned his head and glanced to his side. The black dog walked past him, and with a somewhat curious look, it came to the pool and looked into the water. The green water reflected the face of Atsu. It looked a little confused, and then this black dog once again showed a personality that was 10 times stronger than its owner. Well, to put it simply, it was reckless. Atsu saw the black fire on the leaves in the water. It was not a stranger to it, and it was shocked. Its eyes widened, and then it roared. Then, its body suddenly jumped, and with a splash, it jumped directly into the water. Boom! Water splashed everywhere, drenching Lu Chen's shoes and trousers. For a moment, Lu Chen was also a little dumbfounded. After he reacted, he could not help but curse, "Stupid dog, you." At that moment, Lu Chen really had the urge to cover his forehead and look up to the sky and sigh. He shook his head, dived into the water, and grabbed this weird stupid dog's tail, and pulled it out. He said, "Behave yourself, what's going on down there, we still haven't." Suddenly, his voice became low, and he frowned. He stared at Atsu that he had just pulled out and saw that it was holding a leaf that was burning with black fire in its mouth. Then, Atsu was holding it in its mouth and chewing it, looking particularly sweet and delicious. At the same time, Lu Chen clearly saw that the color of the black fire in Atsu's eyes suddenly intensified several times in an instant. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.